What if Deku got a harem and became a dad? How would this change everything? Before we start, I want you guys to subscribe to my channel. Hit the like button, and also share this video with your friends. It will really mean a lot to me. You can also check other what ifs in the channel. The like aim for this video is 200. Your support keeps me motivated to bring more intriguing what ifs for you guys. Now let's begin. In this world where amazing powers are born into existence, there is a profession regarded above all others, and that is to be a hero. Heroes are the epitome of human aspirations, but being a hero isn't all about rescuing damsels in distress and one-punching villains. No, so much more goes into it than that. Popularity, prestige, perspective. A hero lives and dies by these things, and with such a sword over their heads, even heroes need help. With this threat, there is someone even heroes look up to save them from falling into the pit of obscurity. The quirk alchemist, the maker of heroes. An alarm clock went off at her bedside before her hand slipped free of the opulent covers to turn it off before from out of these covers emerged a man in his 20s. He had curly green hair in a terrible state of bedhead as the man stood up in all-might boxers as he stretched, scratching his chest before falling to the ground and began doing push-ups. This man was Izuku Midoriya, top graduate of UA business course and owner of Deku Consultations. His business was a household name specializing in helping heroes in all aspects of their career, from innovative quirk training to publicity coaching. His name is said in the same sentences as those of Lemillion, Shoto, and Ingenium. On the other side of the bed, a mane of raven hair exited from the covers, followed quickly by a feminine body in a nightgown. Bare feet touched the carpet as she stood up with a stretch and an elegant yawn before entering the bathroom to turn on the light as she began her morning routine. This woman was Momo Yoirozu Midoriya, only daughter of the Yoirozu and the heroine Creati. Momo was in the top 10 of the hero rankings. With her creation, quirk, and popularity, it was only natural. Izuku walked up behind Momo, kissing her neck as he moved to grab the toothpaste and his toothbrush, and began brushing his teeth as well. "So what's on the agenda today?" Momo asked as Izuku spit out the toothpaste and washed his face. "Well, I have an appointment with Iida later today. He wants my opinion on training regimens for his new interns from the last sports festival. Then I have a meeting with Tokoyami. He wants to raise his polls in the popularity department. After that, I have to prep Monoma for his TV appearance. His ratings are abysmal," Izuku said, combing his green hair back from his face as he came out of the bathroom to see Yoirozu getting dressed in something simple by her standards, but housewives across the nation would bend over backwards for a dress like what Momo wore. It was a pale red that ended just above her knees with long sleeves and a collar that framed her neck elegantly. The brightness of the dress made her raven hair stand out all the more as Momo put on her shoes. Izuku moved to the closet, getting out a gray dress shirt and green suit coat before moving to his dresser and pulling out matching green slacks and getting dressed. "I'm going down to give the chef our breakfast orders. What do you want, and would you mind waking up Yuzu?" Momo asked as she moved towards the bedroom door. "Sure thing, and I'll have omelette rice," he said as he left the bedroom and went down the hall, passing several bedrooms. The house was far too large in Izuku's opinion, but when he married Momo, he married her wealth too, so he just rolled with the extravagant mansion. Apparently, he'd been a godsend to his in-laws. Momo had no interest in running her family company, but Izuku, already having a company of his own, was the perfect fit for the job. Shortly after their marriage, Deku Consultation was part of the Yoirozu group name with him as CEO. Izuku shuddered at the heavy title on his head, but he had a knack for business, it seemed. He stopped at a door with a plaque hanging on it with the name Yuzu engraved into the wood. As he was about to knock, he got an idea and smiled before ruffling his hair some, and then knocked far too quietly for anyone to have heard him. After waiting a few seconds, Izuku slammed open the door and turned on the light, revealing his best impression of All Might's face. "I am here to wake you up for breakfast," he shouted happily as his daughter jumped in bed, her quirk activating, creating objects from green psychokinetic energy that hurtled towards her father, who dodged them expertly, as Yuzu fell to the bed, looking angrily at her dad. "Father, why would you do that?" she shouted as she combed her long curly green hair from around her face, as she got out of bed, stamping her feet as Izuku chuckled. "I just wanted to give you the #1 hero's wake-up call for my #1 daughter Yuzu," he said, walking over to her and ruffling her hair as she pouted and turned away from him with a blush. "It's not polite to barge into a lady's room, father," she said, walking over to grab her uniform from the hanger on the wall. "Besides, aren't you going to be late for work?" she asked as Izuku sat on her bed. "No, I have a rare late start today, so I figured I'd take you to school," he said, watching Yuzu stand still for a moment and look over her shoulder. "Really?" she asked, a tremor of hope running through her, as she began frantically looking over her clothes for any wrinkle of blemish, as if the slightest imperfection would snatch this golden opportunity away from her. "Well, get out so I can get dressed," she shouted, blushing as Izuku made his way to the door, shutting it behind him as he rubbed his nose. "I'm the #1 dad," he said excitedly as he headed down the stairs to the kitchen, seeing his wife already sitting with a cup of coffee in her hand. "I trust you liked your surprise," Momo said as Izuku sat next to her with a goofy grin. Izuku had told Momo about his late start today sometime last week, and the man had been sitting on pins and needles wanting to tell his daughter so bad, but keeping himself in check. Yup. I just wish I could do more. I want to be there more for her. He said with a sigh as Momo nodded. Me too, Izuku, but with my hero work and you running both Deku consultations and Yoyorozu Incorporated. Izuku nodded just as his daughter appeared wearing her school uniform, a blue skirt with a tan dress shirt. Good morning, mother. Yuzu said as Momo smiled at her. The family of three sat down as breakfast was served by the family chef. He placed a fruit salad in front of Momo, a plate of omelette rice in front of Izuku, and 2 slices of French toast in front of Yuzu. The latter plates being accompanied by a fruit smoothie and a glass of orange juice. As the three ate their breakfast, Momo received a call from her office inside. Looks like I'll be leaving first today. A highway has collapsed and I'm needed immediately. Sorry, you too. She said, kissing Izuku on the lips before kissing Yuzu on the forehead as she quickly left. Be safe. Father and daughter said simultaneously before returning to their breakfast. As the two finished their breakfast and headed towards the door, Izuku's phone went off. He switched his briefcase around to answer his phone. Hello. He answered as the voice of Denki Kaminari, better known as the hero Chargeable, shouted through his phone speakers. Midoriya, I need your help, man. He shouted as Izuku sighed. Kaminari, I'm kind of busy today, maybe we can set something up later. Izuku said as Kaminari continued to plead. Please Midoriya, I know your time is precious and you have a lot of things on your plate, but I'm begging you, man, please. 5 minutes, that's all I ask. Izuku sighed before caving to Denki's pleas. Fine, I'll meet you at your agency in half an hour. He said before hanging up and looking down at his daughter's eyes that were cast in shadow as Izuku kneeled down to her. Yuzu something. It's fine, father, I understand. She said, walking to the car and climbing in after their chauffeur opened the door for her, and guiltily Izuku started towards his own car. Before getting an idea as Yuzu's car began pulling out of the driveway, Izuku ran up to it, slapping the driver's window and stopping the car. Sir, the driver asked, scared he'd done something to be fired for. Change of plans, I'll be taking Yuzu. Izuku said, going to the back of the car and opening the door. Yuzu, come on, you're coming with me. He said as the little girl's face broke into a smile, and she eagerly climbed out of the car following Izuku, who looked at the driver. You have the day off, spend it well. He said, leaving the driver dumbfounded as Izuku and Yuzu crawled into his car, both buckling up as Izuku pulled out of the driveway into the street. Yuzu couldn't stop herself from smiling. For any other child, having your parent take you to school was probably the norm, but for Yuzu this was monumental. She rarely got to see her parents except on TV, and at parent-teacher conferences, which would be lucky to have one of her parents show up. Yuzu watched as her school approached, growing steadily larger in the windshield, sighing inwardly, wishing this didn't have to end, but she wouldn't be greedy. Her parents were doing good work, and she should respect that, but as Yuzu prepared to disembark, her father drove right by the school. At the questioning look on Yuzu's face, Izuku smiled. I said you were coming with me today, and I meant it, Yuzu. You get to spend the day with daddy. He said with a smile as he and his daughter drove to the Chargeable Hero Agency. Izuku parked and retrieved his briefcase as he and Yuzu went inside and up to the reception desk. Yes, sir. The secretary asked as she looked at Izuku, who coughed nervously. Yes, I'm Izuku Midoriya, here to see. At the mention of his name, the woman immediately shot up. Oh, of course, so sorry, Mr. Midoriya, please right this way. She said, eagerly leading Izuku into a meeting room. I'll tell Chargeable you're here. Can I get you anything? She asked before looking at Yuzu. Can I get you anything, young lady? The secretary asked as Yuzu shook her head. No thank you. Izuku looked to the secretary. Tea is fine, thank you. He said as the secretary left, leaving Izuku and Yuzu in a comfortable silence. I don't think mother is going to like me missing school, father. Yuzu said with a nervous smile as Izuku gave a tense breath. Definitely not, but I can handle it. He said, tugging at his collar at the thought of how angry his wife is going to be. The door to the meeting room burst open and in came Chargeable, and beside him was his wife and crime fighting partner, Earphone Jack. Oh, thank God, Midoriya, I'm so thankful you came. I really need your golden touch here. Kaminari said as he pulled out a chair for his obviously pregnant wife, who took notice of Yuzu. The secretary sat down several cups of tea before quickly leaving. Yuzu, is it you? I think this is the first time I've seen you in person. Yeah, Momo would always send us girls pictures of you. Wow, you look a lot like your dad. She said, pointing at Yuzu's curly green hair. Thank you, Mrs. Kaminari. Yuzu said, bowing as Jiro blushed. Oh, I hope our little one is as polite as you. She said, rubbing her belly. Yes. Now Midoriya, first off, I'm really sorry about calling you up out of the blue. I know you have a lot going on, so thank you so much for coming here. Kaminari said, bowing before sitting up straight and just blurting out what he wanted Izuku's help with. I want to know if you can get me into the top 10 hero rankings. Kaminari asked as Izuku leaned back. That's a hefty thing to ask, Kaminari. The new rankings are only a few months away. Izuku said, rubbing his chin, adopting his business mode as he pulled out a tablet to display Chargeable's hero stats. Your overall stats aren't bad, but when put next to the likes of Shoto and Lemillion, you see how things stack up. Izuku said as Kaminari dropped his head to the table. I know, but I just really want a spot in the top 10. Kaminari said as Izuku arched a brow. Okay, Denki, level with me here. As a friend of Momo's, I'd like to help, so what's the real reason behind this? Izuku asked as Kaminari lifted his head from the table. As you can see, Midoriya, I have a kid on the way and I want them to be proud of me. I want a spot in the top 10 so that when this baby is born, he can know that his dad was someone great. I don't care what spot I get in the 10, I could be at the very bottom, but I'd be the bottom of the best. I never really thought about my ranking until Kyoka told me she was pregnant. Then I started thinking about what I could do for my kid, and this came to mind. It might sound selfish that I want to look good for my kid, but I really do, so can you help me? Kaminari said as Izuku sighed before speaking. Of course I can. I can't promise a spot in the top 10, but I'll do my very best, so let's get to work. Izuku said, pulling out his briefcase. This was the first time Yuzu saw her dad at work. She knew her dad helped heroes with their work, but had never really understood how important he was to them. The utter relief on Kaminari's face when her father accepted the job was palpable, and the fervor that her father put into his work was astounding. Never before had Yuzu been so proud of her father as this moment. It played out the same with every appointment her father had. No matter the hero, all of them depended heavily on her father's work. Her father was the hero to heroes. It was almost nightfall when Izuku and Yuzu made their way home. Her father looked drained, but the smile on his face told a different story. Oh man, Manama is something else. Izuku said as he shook his head and rubbed his stomach. I'm starving, how about you, Yuzu? Izuku asked as his daughter looked at him. Father, you're amazing, she said excitedly as Izuku blushed and rubbed his head. No, I'm not all that great, I'm just a guy still trying to live out his dream of being a hero. Unlike you and your mom, I don't have a quirk, so I had to figure out a different way to help people and be a hero, and I came up with the idea of helping heroes further their quirks, and that led to all this. Meeting your mother, running a multi-million yen company, and best of all, having a daughter like you, he said with a proud smile as they pulled into the driveway, and the two disembarked from the car with Yuzu blushing heavily at her father's words. Can I come with you to work again sometime? Yuzu asked as Izuku smiled. Of course, just not on school days anymore, he said, opening the door and coming face to face with an angry Momo. You made Yuzu skip school, she shouted, making Izuku feel as small as an ant. Yuzu, honey, dinner's in the dining room. You, father, and I need to have a talk, Momo said, dragging Izuku into the study and shutting the doors, though they did little to muffle her mother's shouts. Yuzu smiled as she went into the dining room. She could hardly wait to see her dad at work again. The sun shone into a bedroom, the daylight steadily crept across the green blanket until it shone on the face of a young girl. Her face scrunched against the light as her eyelids flickered, slowly adjusting to the harsh morning light. The girl sat up, her long red hair sticking out in tufts here and there as she rubbed her eyes. Her skin was a mottled red and orange, reminiscent of flickering flames, as she yawned, releasing a puff of fire. This girl was 10-year-old Sumika Midoriya, only daughter and eldest child of the rainy day hero Frappi, and the #1 hero Entei, also known as Izuku and Tsuyu Midoriya, are mama and dad to her. Sumika crawled out of bed in blue shorts that clashed with her vibrant skin tone and a large white t-shirt. She opened her bedroom door, heading to her twin brother's room, Izuho and Tsuko. She was sure they were both still asleep, being only a year old, but she still wanted to check. Being the daughter of heroes, let alone the #1 hero, meant she didn't get to see her parents often, but hey, it was summer vacation, which meant aside from checking in on her younger siblings, she had the entire house to herself. As she walked past her parents' room, she heard movement in her brother's room. Sumika slowed down, moving quietly to the room. No one should be here but the three of them. Her mother was probably at the agency already if she hadn't just slept there, and her father was in Italy and wouldn't be back for another day or two. Sumika peeked around the corner of the twins' room and was shocked to see her father standing over their crib. He seemed lost in thought, or just lost in the sight of the twins. This wasn't unusual. Sometimes she'd catch him just staring at them, or sometimes her like he was looking for something in them or measuring them in some way. It was weird, but her dad was a weird guy. Sumika decided to break her father from his reverie. There was no telling how long he'd just been staring at the twins. Dad, Sumika said, jarring Izuku as he turned around. This was something only she and her mother would see. The #1 hero startled. Their father's hair was a brilliant red, just like his father's, and just as curly, though he cut it short in an attempt to manage the unruliness. Izuku was a tall man, a little over 6 feet and rippling with muscle that was barely contained by his day-old clothes. She just clucked her tongue at the sight of her father's wrinkled shirt and pants. Sumika, I didn't expect you to be up right now, he said, rubbing the back of his head as he looked back at the twins. Oh, I took care of the twins, fresh diapers all around, he said with a shy grin as Sumika smiled gently. Thanks, Dad, I was coming in here to check on them. I thought you weren't supposed to be back until a couple days from now, Sumika asked as her father slowly left the twins' room. Oh yeah, well, things went smoother than expected, so I was able to come home early. I got here. Izuku looked at his watch and his eyes bucked. A couple hours ago, he asked, shocked, wondering if his watch was broken. Dad, have you just been standing at the twins' crib this whole time? Sumika asked, a little worried. Maybe you should get some sleep. she said, but Izuku shook his head. "Oh, I'm fine, I slept on the plane," he said with a smile. "Besides, I want to spend time with you. What do you say we whip up some breakfast together? You know, make it a father-daughter day," he asked, smiling like a child ready to show off a new trick. "I don't know, Dad. I was kind of just going to." Sumika watched as her father began to deflate before her eyes. His disappointment was palpable. "I understand you probably want to go hang out with your friends. I don't want to get in your way or anything. I'll just hang out with the twins. We'll have a boys' day or something whenever they wake up," he said, trudging towards the living room. Sumika was caught between sighing and laughing. It was at times like this that she couldn't believe her dad was the #1 hero. No offense to her father, but it was just so hard to equate the pouting man before her to the symbol of peace she saw, basically everywhere. From TV, to video games, and clothes, he was a paragon, but right now he was just her dad, desperate to spend time with her. "You know what, Dad, breakfast sounds nice," she said, and watched her dad inflate and flash his award-winning smile. "Great. I picked up a new recipe in Italy, I thought you'd like to try it out," he said, rushing to the kitchen as Sumika followed after him, watching him grab pans and ingredients, but completely neglect the stove. Her dad knew that she liked to cook and to try new dishes. That was why he made it a point to try new foods whenever he left Japan, which for being this country's #1 hero he did pretty often. His last trip was to Paris, she thought, or maybe America. "I'll get the stove for you, Dad," Sumika said as Izuku shook his head. "Why do that when I've got all the firepower we'll need right here?" he said, creating a ball of fire in his hands, to which he placed the frying pan on with a little butter that almost immediately began to melt. Izuku then pushed the fireball away from him, having it float over the stove pan and all. Sumika just shook her head. "You don't have to show off for me, Dad," she said as Izuku smirked. "Your mother gets annoyed when I cook like this," he said as a look crossed his face. She couldn't tell what it was exactly, but it looked like he was in pain, but the look was quickly swept off his face. "Anyway, while I was in Italy I learned about this thing called a frittata. It was really good at the restaurant I got it from," he said as he moved to the fridge and pulled out various things. Her father's quirk is pyrokinesis. With it he could create and sustain fire, manipulating it as he pleased. Sumika just watched the flame slowly float in the kitchen, almost a living thing in its own right, as her father came back with bacon, mushrooms, tomatoes, potatoes, and chives. "How have things been going with you, Tsumi?" Izuku asked, using her childish nickname, which immediately caused her to blush and pout, as he set the ingredients in front of her, and going back to the fridge to get eggs and cream. "Dad, don't call me that," she said, beginning to chop the various components in front of her. Of course, to anyone other than her immediate family, she doubted they would notice she was upset. She'd gotten her mother's poker face, or so she'd been told by her friends and family. Izuku chuckled as he whisked the eggs and cream together. "Well?" he asked, not willing to let his question go. "Things have been fine. My grades are good," she said, not sure what to tell him. Izuku nodded. "Speaking of school, have you thought of what you want to do when you get older, or what schools you want to attend?" he asked, seeing that Sumika was done with the potatoes and brought the pan-carrying fireball over to her, so she could slide the potatoes in, as Izuku manipulated the fireball to shift the pan, stirring the potatoes around. Sumika was quiet, thinking about her father's question. Of course she knew what he probably wanted to hear, that she wanted to be a hero like him and her mother. On some level she did. Everyone told her that her quirk was unique and power-worthy of a harem. Not to mention both their parents were graduates of the top hero school in Japan. Of course she wanted to follow in her parents' footsteps, but she just didn't know if she had it in her to do so. The way her dad described heroes, it seemed like it was something you either had or didn't, and she wasn't sure she did. Seeing Sumika had stopped chopping the bacon mid-strip, Izuku walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "What's wrong?" he asked as Sumi looked up at him. "I don't want to disappoint you, but I don't think I want to be a hero," she said, closing her eyes so she wouldn't have to see the disappointment in her father's eyes before feeling his hand on her head. "Sumika, there is nothing you could do to disappoint me ever," Izuku said, thoughts of breakfast gone from his mind as he kneeled to face his daughter. "I mean, I'd be lying if I said I haven't been imagining you saving people since the day you were born, but I understand that the hero life isn't for everyone." Sumika looked into her dad's green eyes and saw only compassion and understanding there. "You're not mad?" she asked as Izuku smiled. "Of course not, sweetheart. I want the best for you, yes, but I also want you to be happy. If that means you don't want to be a hero, then that's fine with me. Whatever you want to do, I'll support you. If you want to be a reporter, I'll go and get you the best equipment money can buy. If you want to be a politician, well, I'll see what I can do about that, but you'll have my vote regardless. And if you want to be an idol, I'll start calling studios and lining up auditions. Whatever I can do to make your dreams come true, I will, no matter what," Izuku said, rubbing his daughter's fiery red hair as tears sprang up in her eyes. That-eyed Sumika was cut off by a hard cough, as the two noticed the smoke accumulating in the room. "Oh no, the potatoes," Izuku shouted, moving his fireball to the sink and dropping the smoking pan into it before running water on it, as Sumika opened the window, laughing in between her coughing. Izuku blushed as he rubbed the back of his head. "Don't tell your mother," he said as he hastily dumped the potatoes out as father and daughter began laughing, only to hear the sounds of upset infants. Izuku said, looking between the pan and his son's room as Sumika waved him back into the kitchen. I've got a dad, how about you finish breakfast without me? Try not to burn the potatoes this time, she said as she went into her brother's room, finding both awake and clutching to the rails of their cribs. Hey guys, did we wake you up? She asked, grabbing both her brothers as they babbled at her, adorably grabbing at her hair and pinching her cheeks. The two looked like their father in miniature, but where his hair was red theirs was green, but just as curly. Sumika brought the duo into the living room as her father placed the pan in the oven and came around the corner to greet his two boys, who exploded into movement as they saw him. Looks like they're happy to see you, Sumika said as Izuku grabbed hold of the two boys, bouncing them in his arms as they giggled happily. The feeling is mutual. How have you been, guys? Izuku asked as the boys moved and jabbered at him, causing Izuku to laugh. Well, that's great. I hope you've been taking care of your mom and sister, he said, giving Sumika a wink as she stuck her tongue out. The quartet fell onto the couch, drinking in the bliss of familial bonding, until Izuku went to the kitchen to retrieve the frittata. He placed it on a serving dish, sliced it like a pizza, grabbing a slice for both himself and Sumi. They began to enjoy their breakfast, feeding bits of thoroughly cooled egg to the youngest of the Midoriya clan, and just having fun with each other. Thanks for letting me stay over at Chaco. I just wasn't sure about seeing Izuku yet, but I'll be fine now, Sue said, giving the brown-haired woman a hug as she left to return to her own home. Sue loved her husband, but she wasn't sure if she could continue watching him run himself ragged. It was fine when he was here in Japan, but lately his fame had grown to the point that he was rarely in the country, let alone with their children, and after that last fight, she didn't think she could take anymore. Sue opened the door to their home, a dead giveaway that her husband was home. He never locked the door. He's crazy enough to break into the #1 hero's home, he said. Sue rounded the corner and found the last thing she expected to see. Her husband was on the couch, fast asleep under a blanket of their 3 kids. At that moment, all her irritation drained away from her as he moved to kiss her husband on the cheek, watching him give a gentle smile before doing the same to their children, as she slowly made room for herself in the pile of bodies. She wasn't the least bit tired, of course, but she couldn't resist being a part of this. In the field behind Nabu Middle School stood a group of boys in a circle surrounding one boy in the center. The boy had curly purple hair to the point it could only be called bushy. His purple hair covered his eyes, and the boy was dressed in the uniform of the school, although it had been stretched to the point it was baggy on the boy's frame. The most defining characteristic was the long earlobes he had, and on the end of these lobes were earphone jacks. The left earlobe was pierced 3 times with gold earrings. He stood with his hands in his pocket as one of the boys approached the singular lad. So you're the new kid, hun? The one everybody shits their pants about. This boy was older than the boy he was talking to and looked down at him as the kid shrugged. I guess, the kid said, raising his head, revealing one of his green eyes from behind his purple locks. I don't see why that's any of your business though. He ended his statement as the upperclassman grit his teeth. Looks like I'm going to have to teach you a lesson, smartest. Guys, hold him while I give him a crash course in middle school etiquette. 2 boys approached from behind the purple-haired kid, laughing a little before the boy's earlobe stretched out, piercing one in the stomach, and the other was driven right into the ear of the other, as vibrations were shot straight into them. The one who had his stomach prodded fell to his knees and vomited as the other simply passed out from the sound overload. What the? The upperclassman said before feeling a fist land in his stomach, dropping him to a knee as he clutched his stomach. That's better, show some respect. I'm Kazuki Midoriya and I don't take shit from bootlickers like you, he shouted before driving his foot into the upperclassman's face, and then looked at the rest of the gathered boys. Does anybody else want to have a taste? He asked, raising his hand as all the boys ran towards him. Kazuki smiled as he jumped into the brawl. Kazuki walked out of the field and grabbed his bag. Let that be a lesson to you pussies. Don't mess with Midoriya-sama, he said, spitting out a bit of blood as he walked away from the scattered bodies of his unconscious classmates. The sun was setting, casting his shadow all the way across the street. His body hurt, but it was worth it. He needed everybody to know that he wasn't anybody's punk. He rounded the corner and ran into someone and growled as he rubbed his sore nose. It wasn't broken, but it definitely hurt. Watch where the hell you're going. Kazuki clapped his mouth shut as he looked into the face of the hero earphone jack, his mother. He sighed as she looked him over. He had hoped he could get home and clean up before his mother saw him or his father. What did you say, Kazuki? His mother demanded, looking him over, and shook her head. You got into another fight again, didn't you? She shouted as Kazuki looked away, only to have his mother grab his chin as she squatted down to look at him. She cleared away the hair from his eyes so they could clearly look eye to eye with him. Didn't you? She asked again as Kazuki rolled his eyes. They started it, was his only answer as Kyoka huffed, standing up and grabbing hold of his hand. This was your first day in your new school, and already you've started a fight. I don't understand, Kizu, why are you causing so much trouble? She asked, dragging him towards her car. What is your father going to say? She asked as she pushed him towards the passenger door and climbed into the driver's seat herself. Nothing, like always, he said, looking out the window as Kyoka sighed. Is that what this is about? You want attention, Kizu? There are better ways to get people to notice you, you know. You're a smart kid, and you're talented in almost everything you do, so why is it that all you want to do is pick fights? She asked, shaking her head. You're just like your father, she said, which galvanized Kazuki into speaking. He'd been happy to let his mother lecture and rant at him for the entire car ride, but he would not let that one go. I'm nothing like him. All he cares about is his precious school and all his awards. That's all he's got. Nobody would ever look at a quirkless nobody like him otherwise. He shouted, only to feel his mother slap him across the face. He'd been hit harder for sure, but the emotional weight of that slap was tantamount to being hit with an elephant. Don't say that. Your father is a good man, and no matter what you think, he cares about you. I just wish you understood that, she said as they pulled up to their house. I have to make my patrols, so I'll be back later. Do your homework and as punishment clean out the storage shed. I will check to make sure when I get back, she said as Kazuki got out of his mother's car and made his way into his home. He shut the door and heard his mother's car drive off. He sighed as he walked to his room and tossed his backpack on his bed. Joke's on you, Mom, I already did my homework, he mumbled as he headed to the back door to get to the shed, but as he did he looked at the walls of the hall, seeing family pictures adorning them. There was the photo of his parents' marriage, pictures of him at various ages, and then the most plentiful pictures were of his dad at various events. There was the picture of his dad at one of his book signings shaking hands with a famous hero he had apparently inspired. Several pictures of his dad with different classes of his students, and finally the picture of his father shaking hands with the former principal of UA as he took his place. That was his father, Izuku Midoriya, principal of UA. The school had arguably been the best school in the country for heroes, but when his father took over, that title was undisputed. UA is the best hero school in Japan. Their entrance rates are abysmal, but their graduates all go on to be the best heroes. His dad was responsible for guiding the future of heroics, and the cherry on top was that his father was quirkless. Kazuki stared at the picture a few more moments before heading out the back door to the shed and dragging a large trash can with him. He unlocked it with his key and opened the doors as a cloud of dust erupted from it. He coughed, waving his hand in front of his face to dispel the miasma, and looked inside. The shed was full of mostly his old man's junk. Much to his chagrin, his mother was right about his old man and him being good at everything they do. He knew that his dad could play just as many instruments as his mother. He was an accomplished author on quirk innovation, and he even consulted on support items. Kazuki growled as he picked up several old devices his father hadn't touched since he was born and threw them into the trash can, followed by legible blueprints, as well as broken tools. It was like a landfill in here. Some of this stuff he had no idea what it was or could have been. Kazuki picked up a box to carry it towards the light of the open door, but the box hadn't aged well, and the bottom fell out of it, depositing its contents on the floor. Oh fuck me, he shouted as he hurled the now useless box out of the shed. Kazuki got down on his knees to sift through the contents. Most of it was junk, mostly notebooks on old heroes, but in this pile of nerd trash there was a photo album. What's this? He asked, sitting down and opening the cover to find a picture of his father as a newborn. The green hair was a dead giveaway. Oh great Pops, you're a narcissist too, though I shouldn't be surprised, he said, flipping through the pages, seeing his father age before his eyes. He stopped at the picture of his father at his middle school entrance ceremony. Izuku had bright green eyes and a wide smile that crinkled his freckles. Kazuki saw his grandparents as well. His grandmother, ever the lovable marshmallow she always was, and his grandfather, the hard-working businessman. Guess Pops takes after you, Gramps, Kazuki said as he turned the page and bit his tongue. What the hell? He shouted, looking at the boy in the picture and comparing it to the picture before. Who the hell is this? He asked as he pulled the picture out and turned it over to see what was written on the back. He was shocked at what he saw. Izuku, age 15. This was his old man, he thought, turning the picture over. His father's hair was long down to his shoulders, with some of it covering his right eye. He was wearing a t-shirt revealing that his entire left arm was covered in a tattoo reminiscent of dragon scales with a skull on his forearm. Both Izuku's ears were pierced, starting from the lobe and curving up the outside of his ear. He had on a pair of gloves with studs around his wrists, black jeans and heavy boots. There's no way this is my old man, Kazuki said, turning the page and saw another picture of his dad. He was wearing different clothes and his hair was pulled into a ponytail, but it was still the same man. This picture was accompanied by a newspaper clipping. Massive altercation ends with dozens in hospital, suspects still at large. From what he could see, Kazuki counted at least 14 unconscious teenagers in the photo. There were more clippings as well. Vandalism on a massive scale. In the clipping was a picture of Aldera Middle School. The building had been painted with a giant skull covered in green flames. Local gang has dominated the Camino area. There was a blurry picture of several individuals running from the police. Kazuki was enthralled as he continued flipping pages, seeing more of his dad's handiwork. This is amazing. I can't believe Pops did all this, he said with a smile before frowning. Wait, he did all this, and Mom's on my ass about getting into a fight. Where's the justice in that? He asked, forgetting about cleaning the shed, and carried the album into the house to wait for his father. His dad was a lot of things, but he always made it home around the same time, and looking at the clock that would be soon. Izuku walked into the house with a stretch as he heard his back pop. Sitting down all day can't be good, he said, shaking his head as he walked into the living room only to see Kazuki sitting there. He'd gotten the call from Kyoka about Kazuki getting into a fight. He sighed as he took his glasses off to pinch the bridge of his nose. I figured you'd still be cleaning the shed. Honestly, Kazuki, I can't believe how like we are, Kazuki said, interrupting his father as he placed the picture of Izuku down on the dinner table in plain sight of both Midoriyas. Izuku looked at the picture before looking at Kazuki. Oh, that's right, you were cleaning the shed, he said, sitting down and pulling the picture towards him and looked at it. He sighed, shaking his head. You shouldn't look at this and see more of yourself in me. This isn't me, Izuku said as Kazuki slammed the photo album on the table. Yes, it is. All this is you. You want the world to see you as this perfect man or whatever, but you're human just like me and you're not perfect. You were just like me, hell, you were even worse. Izuku shook his head. That's not who you are, Kazuki. You're a good kid and you have so much going for you. I don't want you to be like I was, Izuku said as Kazuki leaned back. I don't care what you want. I think what you did was cool. You were awesome. What happened to you? Why did you turn out like this? He asked, waving his hands at Izuku, who scoffed. You just gestured to old me, Kazuki, and now I wasn't awesome. What I did wasn't cool. I was acting out and hurting people just to make myself feel better. I was a delinquent, and if it wasn't, you know what, never mind. I'm not talking about this. Put that thing in the garbage, Izuku said as Kazuki stood up. No, I won't let you take this away from me. For the first time in my life I feel like I actually have something of you. Everyone says I'm like you and compares me to you. I could never see it, Pop. I look at you, the successful man that you are, and all I can see is the facade you show the rest of the world, this flawless man who turns whatever he touches into gold. How can I look at you and see me? But this album shows me that we're not so different, Kazuki said as Izuku turned to face his son. You're not me, Kazuki. I never wanted you to be me. I want you to make your own way in the world. Izuku sat down on the couch and fished a cigarette out of his breast pocket along with a lighter. He scratched his head, undoing his swept back hair to produce his natural curls. Izuku knew he had been hard on his son. What that saying? The priest's kids are the wildest, he thought to himself. Pop, you smoke? Kazuki asked, shocked at this as Izuku smirked. No, I don't, as far as your mother knows anyway. I used to before I met her, but after I went back to school I stopped except for the occasional one like now. You should feel grateful. I only smoke one once a month, and I'm wasting it on you, he said with a cocky grin Kazuki had never seen on his father's face, as he flicked the lighter and lit his cigarette before taking a long drag, as he rolled up his sleeves, showing off the scale tattoo on his left arm. Will you still have that tattoo? Kazuki asked, moving to inspect his father's ink as Izuku chuckled. Damn right I do. I fought your mother tooth and nail on this. In exchange I had to get rid of all my piercings and cut my hair. I'd say it was worth it. I get it touched up every few years, Izuku said before grabbing the album and flipping through it. I really shouldn't have kept this, he said with a laugh as he looked at Kazuki. Go ahead, ask your questions. I'll answer everyone until I finish the cigarette. Afterward we're done, deal? He asked as Kazuki nodded before asking his question. So would you become a delinquent? Kazuki asked as Izuku breathed out smoke. When I was on the verge of graduating middle school I got some bad news. It really set me off. I was so angry and it felt like there was nothing I could do, so I did this, he said, pointing at the graffiti on the school. That was my middle school, and when I saw how everybody reacted to what I'd done I wanted to do more. I picked a fight with some guys from school whose quirks I knew very well and beat them to a pulp. That was how it started, and once I entered high school I was a totally different person. I picked fights, skipped class, and so much more. Izuku shook his head at that. I felt powerful, especially when guys started following me around and getting into trouble with me. I dropped out after my second year of high school. At that point I was doing what I wanted, and that was when I met your mother. Kazuki smirked at that, thinking about his mom at that age. Did she fall for you on the spot, Pops? Kazuki asked as Izuku laughed. Fuck no, she arrested me, he shouted, laughing at his son's shocked face. Yep, your mother was on her work study at the time, and she busted me and my crew after we knocked over an arcade. I was sure she was going to let me go. Most heroes don't deal with quirkless crimes, but nope, she handcuffed me and had me locked up, but seeing as that was my first offense, or so they thought, I was released pretty soon. I was prepared to go right back to what I was doing, but your mother showed up everywhere I was. It was like she was my guard dog or something. I couldn't meet up with my gang because of her, so I finally asked why she was on my ass. Izuku stopped for a moment as that memory flowed through his mind. Why the fuck are you following me? What do you want? He shouted at her as Kyoka put her hands on her hips. I'm trying to figure out your deal. You're acting like a thug, but I've been watching you for a while now, and you seem like a good guy. You knocked over that arcade because the owner was cheating kids out of their money. All the places you've tried to hit are like that. It's like you're trying to be a hero in the worst way possible. Jiro cocked her head to the side as she looked at him. I want to know why. Izuku shrugged at her words. It's none of your goddamn business, go sign autographs or whatever. He said to her, and that's when Kyoka dropped a bomb on him. You know, some people would say you're a hero for what you've done, so why don't you try being a real hero? You're smart enough, I can tell that much. Why not put that brain of yours to good use, because until you do I'm going to be on you like white on rice. Izuku smirked at that memory. After that I went back to school and on to university to be a teacher. Your mother and I started dating and then got married. I stopped being a delinquent because someone finally looked at me and saw something other than the fact that I was quirkless. Izuku said, putting out his cigarette and placing his hand on his son's head. I know it can't be easy being my son Kazuki, but even if no one else sees you for you, me and your mother do, and someday other people will too. And stop picking fights, that's what weak people do, and unlike me at your age you're strong. Izuku said, standing up and looked at the album. You can keep that if you want, I only kept it to remind myself of what I could have been if not for your mother. Izuku said as he went to his office to get some paperwork done, leaving Kazuki sitting and looking at the picture of his dad in his youth. Izuru Midoriya, you're up. Called the quirk application teacher Mr. Kinson. Izuru jolted as his name was called. He hated this class, it was the worst one of the day. He walked slowly, his feet dragging the ground as he stood before the teacher who showed off a rubber ball. You know the drill, Midoriya, catch the ball with your quirk. Mr. Kinson said as Izuru swallowed and nodded. Kinson looked at the kid and felt terrible for him. He was already breaking out in a sweat and they hadn't even started yet. He hefted the ball before tossing it as gently as he could. The ball soared into the air slowly before gravity took hold, bringing it down to the ground only at the last moment to be grabbed in Izuru's telekinetic grip. The ball shuddered in the air as it was slowly lifted until it was at Izuru's waist. Good work, Midoriya. Kinson said as Izuru sweated, his breaths coming out in puffs and pants. His body shook with concentration. Think you're ready for the next one? Kinson asked as Izuru looked up from the shuddering ball and nodded his head. Little boy. Kinson said, tossing another ball that was taken in Izuru's grip for a second, before both balls fell to the ground. Kinson grimaced as several students laughed. Quiet everyone. Kinson shouted before sighing. Alright, Midoriya, back in line. He said, hiking a thumb to the rest of the class. Izuru held his head down as he heard the whispers of his classmates. That's the son of the #1 hero. What a failure. Yeah, imagine how his dad feels knowing his son is such a loser. Pitiful. Weak. Pathetic. After class, Izuru was called to the staff office for a meeting with Mr. Kinson. You wanted to see me, Mr. Kinson? Izuru asked as he sat down. Kinson looked at the boy. His straight green hair and green eyes. The only thing he was missing was the freckles. Yes, Midoriya, here's your report card. Kinson said, handing the boy an envelope which he promptly opened to reveal his grades. As you can see, you're doing phenomenal in your classes except the obvious. I know from your career plan you want to be a hero, but at this rate, that dream is not achievable. Izuru hung his head at those words, and Kinson felt like the world's biggest jackass. He knew Midoriya wasn't failing because he was lazy or not motivated. He saw it on Izuru's face that he was giving the class his all every day, but he wasn't improving. I think you might want to direct your aspirations elsewhere. Kinson finished his assessment as Izuru stood up and bowed. Thank you for your input, sensei. Izuru said before leaving. The words of his teacher and classmates stabbed at Izuru all day, even going so far as to chase him all the way home, as tears started brimming in his eyes. Why am I so weak? I don't want this. It's not my fault, I'm trying. I want to be better, I want to be stronger. Izuru began to speed up as if he could outrun his own ineptitude and the words of his peers. Toru Higakure, number 15 on the hero chart, stood at the stove, stirring the pot of stew she was making for her family tonight. Oh, Izuru is going to be home soon. She thought to herself, turning the stove down to let things simmer as she checked on the rice as the door was flung open. Toru jumped, taking a fighting stance as her son rushed through the house and up to his room as something fell from his pocket. Izuru. She called as she walked forward to pick up the paper, and sighed as she looked at the paper. Oh, Izuru. She said, looking at her son's report card. His grades were above average in all classes except one, quirk application. Her son was failing. She sat down at the island in the kitchen looking at the paper. She knew her son wasn't what this grade said he was. In fact, he was more than anyone could imagine, but he was afraid of his own power. Toru felt her eyes begin to water as the memory of the worst day in her life surfaced. Izuru was 5 at the time his quirk had manifested a little under a year ago, and he was so excited. After all, what son wouldn't be excited about having the same quirk as his #1 hero dad? Toru had taken him to the park to play, and to give her heart a break from her son, trying to lift everything, only to lose concentration and break something. She walked over to a bench as Izuru went to the sandbox, lifting portions of sand, only to let them fall. At some point, Izuru had been asked to join a game of catch. Toru had turned away from her son for only a second, as he tried to use his quirk to catch the ball, but instead knocked it off course and towards the street. By the time she looked back, Izuru had walked out into the street to get the ball just as a car came around the corner. Now the driver wasn't going all that fast and was more than capable of stopping, but instead decided to honk at the young boy in the road. This terrified the young Izuru, and his quirk activated, sending out a telekinetic wall that slammed into the car and threw it onto his side. Izuru's power didn't stop there, though it began lashing out at everything, carving holes into the ground, levitating parked cars, only to then throw them. Trees were uprooted or cut down as Izuru's area of effect increased. Toru leaped into action, evacuating the people in the park and telling them to call the police, while she did her best to comfort her son. Izuru, it's okay, mommy's here. Just calm down, baby, nothing's going to hurt you. But Izuru couldn't hear her as he curled up in the fetal position. If Toru didn't do something, who knows what might happen. I could call Izuku, but that might take too long, and he might not pick up. The same thing could happen with a text. With no other options, Toru took a page from her husband's book and sent out her location to her husband's phone. Please Izuku, get here fast. As if hearing her plea, a green bolt appeared in the sky and landed next to her. Izuku Midoriya stood in his hero costume, a deep green bodysuit, and a brilliant white cape fluttered behind him. Izuku looked at his son on the ground before walking forward. Toru saw that the telekinetic disturbances her son was creating began to arc and bounce against Izuku's own power, as he created a steadily shrinking dome around himself and Izuru, coiling Izuru's berserk power. Izuku reached down and pulled Izuru into his arms, patting his back as he said something in his ear. Slowly Izuru's power came back under control before dispersing completely. Toru felt tears in her eyes as she embraced the two. Toru wiped tears from her face as she coughed. If that incident told her anything, then Izuru's power might be even greater than his father's, but from that day Izuru was terrified of his abilities. He could barely use a fraction now. After speaking to a therapist, they were given the reasoning that Izuru had psychologically blocked his powers, limiting them drastically. The front door opened, drawing Toru from her reverie. Oh man, that was a crazy day, Izuku said, walking around the corner. He was dressed in olive green cargo pants and a white t-shirt with a smile on his face. Hey Toru, I was working with Sato today and guess what he gave me? A cake he made, Izuku said, presenting the nondescript white box, and was about to open it before going silent and looking at her. Why are you sad? He asked as Toru sighed. You would think as an invisible woman she'd be the best at hiding her emotions, but not with her husband, who seemed to read her as well as if she had print on her face. One of these days you're going to tell me how you can read me so well. I'm invisible, she said as Izuku placed the cake on the island and leaned close. I will after you tell me why you're sad, he said as Toru gave a sigh and presented Izuru's report card. He ran up to his room and dropped this on the way. What are we going to do, Izuku? She asked as Izuku looked at the report card and nodded. I'll have a talk with him later. I think it's time we really hash this out, he said, scratching his head as Toru arched a brow. How do you mean? She asked as Izuku smirked and tapped her nose before adopting All Might's smile. That is a secret, he shouted as Toru huffed angrily to his booming laughter. Izuru had been lying in his bed since he got home. His mind was an echoing voice of depression and self-pity. He sat up as his stomach grumbled, telling him he hadn't eaten. He sighed before standing up. At least I can do that, right? He said, walking to his bedroom door and made his way to the kitchen where his dad sat. Izuru felt more weight settle on his shoulders as he looked at his father. Imagine how his dad feels knowing his son is such a loser. Those words nearly tore the wind from his lungs. Hey Tausen, he said, waving his hand weakly as Izuku stood up and walked over to him. Come with me, son, Izuku said, keeping his face blank as he did so and headed to the door. Izuru looked between the kitchen and his father's back before reluctantly following his father out the door. Where are we going, Tausen? Izuru asked, but instead of answering, Izuku took hold of his son's hand and leapt into the air, using his telekinetic powers to levitate the both of them before flying off. Izuru clutched to his father's side as they soared over the city. He never knew how his dad was able to use his powers so effortlessly. Apparently levitating oneself is an incredibly difficult task, and yet his father could fly at inhuman speeds with his telekinesis. Yet another thing he could never hope to do. His father landed on the sand of a beach as Izuru pulled away from his side. He looked at the pristine white sand as the moonlight shone off the lapping waves of the ocean. His dad sat down on the sand before Izuru did as well. What are we doing here, Tausen? Izuru asked as Izuku cast a green eye over to his son. Izuru apparently had his mother's eyes, seeing as his were as blue as a cloudless sky. We're here to talk about you, Izuru. I saw your report card, his father explained as it felt like an anvil had dropped into Izuru's stomach. You're doing really well in all of your classes except quirk application, and I also know why that is. Izuru grit his teeth. You, Tausen, you have no idea what it's like to be me. You have complete control of your power and always have. You don't know what it's like to be scared of your power. I hate your quirk, he shouted as Izuku nodded his head. But I do, he said, contradicting his son. Izuru looked at his dad. How can you possibly know? He asked as Izuku took a deep breath. As you may have heard from your grandmother, I was a natural with my telekinesis, and trained hard to make it as strong as I could. But what you don't know, is that after graduating from middle school, my quirk grew really powerful. It was nearly uncontrollable and it scared me, Izuku said, shaking his head. I dialed my power back so bad I nearly failed getting into UA, Izuku said with a chuckle. I knew I had to do something to make myself more comfortable with my power, so instead of focusing on using my powers on other things, I began using it on myself. Izuku explained as Izuru could understand that logic. Keeping his power close to himself allowed him the utmost control, while minimizing any outbursts of power. A lot of people wonder how it is I can levitate myself to fly so easily, but it's not easy. It took all of my first year to learn how to maneuver myself. After that I began to extend my range outward, steadily growing used to my increased power. Izuku reached out with his hand as a glob of seawater was lifted from the ocean, floating there for a moment before being launched into the sky. Izuru, I'm not here to tell you how to use your quirk. If you never want to use it again, that's fine. I think it'd be a waste, but at the end of the day it's your power, not mine. Izuru looked at his dad as he felt his eyes sting with tears. I want to use my quirk. I want to be able to help people. I want to be like your Choza. I want to be a hero too, but I'm just so scared of what could happen. I don't know how to make all this power my own. Izuru said as Izuku stood up and placed a hand on his son's head. And that's why I'm here, Izuru. I'm your dad. Whenever you're feeling uncertain, come to me or your mother. We're here for you always, no matter what. Izuku said, smiling down at Izuru, who wiped tears from his face and grinned back. Trust me, by Monday you'll be leagues away from what you were today. All you have to do is take that first step and then the next. Izuku said as the ball of water he'd hurled into the air slammed back into the water as a large ball of ice. Now then, let's start. I want you to let loose on me, Izuru. Release as much of your power as you can right at me. Izuku said, walking a few yards away as Izuru felt his father's power encircle them. Don't worry about anything else, just focus on me and let it rip. I promise that you won't hurt me or anyone else. Izuku said as Izuru swallowed, feeling the same anxiety he felt every time he used his quirk. Seeing this, Izuku intervened. Izuru, close your eyes and breathe. Don't imagine forcing the power out, just let it flow from you into the world. Gather the power with every inhale and then let it go every time you exhale. Izuru took his father's advice, just focusing on his breathing. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, and breathe out. Izuru repeated, feeling his body steadily relax as minutes went by. He felt his father next to him. Okay, open your eyes. He said, and Izuru did, and as he did so he saw that he was standing on a platform of sand about 10 yards across, that was floating several dozen feet in the air. Whoa! Izuru shouted, losing his concentration some as his father steadied him. Easy there, son, see what you can do when you relax and just focus. Block out everything but what you're doing, and I know you can be the kind of hero you want to be. This is your power, Izuru. Izuru looked at his dad and smiled as he looked at what he'd accomplished. Thanks, Choza. On Monday, Izuru was once again called to practice his quirk by Mr. Kinson. He heard the snickering of his classmates as he approached the table. Alright, Midoriya, let's see if you can. Kinson was interrupted as Izuru grabbed the 4 styrofoam balls, 2 in each hand, before closing his eyes and breathing in and out as he directed the flow of his power to his hands. Just focus on the balls, that's all you need to do. Izuru thought to himself as his class watched the balls begin to float above his hands, rising steadily before stopping above Izuru's head, and begin to circle his head, as Izuru himself began to levitate as well. Kinson looked at his worst student make a giant leap with using his power. Midoriya, you get an A. Kinson said as Izuru opened his eyes and dropped to the ground shakily along with the 4 balls. Thank you, Mr. Kinson. Izuru said with a grin. The world was forever changed by the appearance of quirks. Amazing powers being given out to do good in the world, and who is responsible for these amazing powers? The Queen of Quirks. This generous and benevolent ruler gifted the world with quirks, but others coveted her power, and one man slew the queen hoping to gain this power. Unknown to the world, the queen had a daughter, and all her power was passed to this young child who she entrusted to her most valiant guardian. It is this man's duty to protect the child until she comes of age to take her mother's throne and restore balance to the world of quirks. Featuring the talents of Helena Bonham Carter as the Queen of Quirks, Idris Elba as All for One, and Izuku Midoriya as the Guardian, coming to theaters near you Friday. The phone screen went dark with the replay symbol being displayed. Oh my god, this looks so good, shouted a girl with straight blonde hair and in a school uniform as she kicked her legs on the desk she sat on. And Izuku looks so hot, she squealed as her fellow classmates agreed. God, yes, that curly green hair that you want to run your fingers through. One girl with purple hair and freckles added. Forget the hair, I want to run my tongue over his 6-pack. I bet he tastes like pure euphoria dipped in chocolate. Another added, her snake-like tongue slithering between her pointed teeth, as she did so not notice the presence behind her until she spoke. The girl with curly maroon hair stood behind the snake-like individual. The girl had pink skin and a pair of 4-inch green horns that curved backwards like that of an antelope. She wore the school uniform, which consisted of a dark blue shirt and trousers, white gloves and boots, and a white double-breasted tailcoat. On her left arm was a pinned band that marked her as the student council president, Maneko Midoriya. Now that is no way for ladies to speak, wouldn't you agree? She asked, shocking the trio into stunned silence. I'm sorry, President Midoriya. The girl had been playing the video on her phone, said, blushing as Minako nodded. Glad to hear it. This is a prestigious girls' school known for raising the best of young ladies. Do keep that in mind. Minako said as she left the classroom followed by her vice president. This girl had two-tone black and red hair with mismatched eyes. Her right eye being black and her left eye being a light blue. This girl is Ryaiju Todoroki, Vice Student Council President of CI Middle School. As the two exited the classroom and made their way down the hall, Minako's smile fell from her face. Who do those sluts think they are? They don't have the right to breathe the same air as my dear papa, let alone meet him in person. And that one bitch thinking about my papa in such a manner, I should rip that disgusting tongue from her mouth. Minako growled as drops of acid hit the ground, flaring up in short bursts of flame. Minako, do calm down. I'd rather not have to dip into the student council's funds to repair this damage. Ryaiju said, calling Minako's attention to the results of her tantrum. Oh sorry Ray. I just get so mad knowing all these girls think about is doing my papa. As if he'd ever give them the time of day when he has me. Minako said with a smile as she entered the student council room. I think you meant to say when he has your mother. Ryaiju said as Minako waved her off. Yeah, I guess. She said, sitting down at the head of the long table as Ryaiju took her seat at Minako's right-hand side. The others should be here soon, don't you think? She asked as Ryaiju looked through her notes. Kaminari is at the music hall, so she won't be coming. Ryaiju said as Minako sat forward. Oh yeah, that's right, she told me that the other day. Minako remembered. Ojiro is off campus at a martial arts tournament. So far she's doing quite well, I hear. Ryaiju said, showing a picture of Ojiro knocking a girl out of a ring without apparently touching her. What do you expect from the daughter of a martial artist, though isn't it kind of cheating since her tail's invisible? Minako asked as Ryaiju shrugged. That's not the louder in. Asui is also off campus at a swimming competition. Ryaiju said, putting her papers down as Minako stood up. Well, if it's just you and me, I say we call it a day. Minako said as she stood up from her chair, and Ryaiju nodded. I suppose you're right, not like we can handle any real issues without the rest of the student council. Would you like to go anywhere after school, Minako? Ryaiju asked as the president shook her head. Thanks for the offer, Ray, but I think I'm going to just head home for the day. See you tomorrow. She said as the two girls embraced before parting ways. Minako made her way home thinking about her father. He should be home soon. Papa said that after the trailer aired he'd be home soon after that. Izuku had been in the UK on the set of The Guardian, his third starring role movie so far. Her father was a movie star and a damn good one, touted as the best young actor of this generation. She smiled at this, feeling a blush on her face as she basked in the pride of her father's prestige. She walked into her home and looked around. Guess mom's not home, she said as she sat down at the table to do her homework. Her mother was a professional hero, the corrosive pink crusader Pinky. She shook her head. It was a terrible name for a grown woman. She knew her mother picked out the name in high school, but it was ridiculous. She pulled out her homework and got to work on it. The front door opened, admitting a very tired Mina Ashido. Oh boy, that was a day and a half. She shouted, tired but happy. Mina loved being a hero, it was her calling in life, much like her husband's calling was the big screen. She walked into the living room and saw her daughter sitting there. She smiled tightly. Maneko and she shared the same skin tone and eyes, and not much else, or so that's how her daughter liked to portray herself. Mina loved Minako, and she was sure her daughter felt the same, but they didn't get along. Not to say they were in constant shouting matches or something, it was just a distance between them that Mina couldn't seem to close, no matter how hard she tried. Hey Minako, Mina said, coming up to her daughter and looking over her shoulder. What you working on? Mina asked as Minako stopped her pencil for a split second before starting to move again. History, was her one-word response as Mina went to the fridge and pulled out a beer. There was nothing like a cold one after a long day's work. She sat down next to her daughter. Anything I can help you with? She asked as Minako shook her head. I doubt it, was her response, which stung a little. Mina wasn't the smartest person around, but she could at least try. Mina sighed as she sat forward. She'd been planning on having a talk with Minako for a few months now, but with her hero's schedule and her daughter's responsibilities as student council president, it was hard to find the time. That was the excuse Mina told herself, but the truth is she was procrastinating. Izuku had always been better at this sort of thing, but enough was enough, it was time for Mina to mother up. Minako Winnie. The front door opened, which set Mina's protective instincts off as she jumped to her feet, only to spot the face of her husband. Desu, he shouted, coming round the corner dressed in a purple jacket with a green shirt and blue jeans and sneakers. Papa, Minako shouted, launching herself at Izuku, who grabbed her and hugged her close. Got it in one, Minako, Izuku said, kissing her forehead as he looked at Mina, who smiled gently as she walked up to him. Hey babe, she said as the two shared a quick but passionate kiss. Why didn't you say you were coming home? She asked as Izuku shrugged. I wasn't sure I was going to be coming home. The trailer dropped last week, I should have been home then, but the director was a real perfectionist. He wanted to run through some things that turned into a whole other mess, which prolonged my stay. Not that I'm complaining when it's not raining or foggy, the UK is really beautiful. I brought pictures, he announced, taking the duffel bag off his shoulder and pulling it open to pull out a plastic bag from which he pulled a holodisc. I also brought souvenirs, he said, pulling out a tiara. A replica of the Queen of England's crown for my princess, he said, placing it atop Mineko's curly hair. Izuku, don't you think she's a bit old for that? Mina asked as Mineko glared at her. I love it, Dad, she said, hugging the kneeling Izuku, who nodded. Glad to hear it, he said, standing up as he pulled a dress from the bag. And for my lovely wife for her serio-tiered sheer polka dot dress, which Izuku held up to Mina's frame. Mina blushed as she held the dress to her body and smiled. You really know what I like, don't you? She said as Izuku scratched the stubble on his chin. If I'm being honest, I had a bit of help from the store attendant, though after looking at the price tag, I think she was just helping herself to my wallet, he said as he hugged Mina from behind. I'm glad you like it, he said as he then felt a tug on his arm. Dad, I could use some help with my homework as history, Mineko said as Izuku let go of Mina. Sure thing, history is my best subject, don't you know? Did you know that the British Army was using rockets more than a century before the German the 5th? The British came up against rockets when they were fighting in India after the war ended, and just 6 years later the British had developed rockets with a range of 2,000 yards. Izuku explained, embracing the nerd he'd always been. That's amazing, Dad, you learn the coolest stuff abroad. I want to travel when I get older, Mineko said as Mina interjected. Mineko, I just asked if you wanted me to help with your homework, and you said no. Mineko looked at her mother and shook her head. I didn't say no, I said I doubted you could be of any help. Okay, that was blatantly painful. Mina felt her eyes swell with tears. This was her daughter, and Mineko had always been a daddy's girl, and Mina accepted that after all she herself was a daddy's girl. But this went beyond Mineko, preferring to sit by Izuku's side, or listen to Izuku's stories of his time abroad, than Mina's actions as a hero. Her daughter was doing everything she could to cut her out of her life. The dam finally broke as Mina ran to the bedroom and slammed the door. Mineko watched her mother go before looking at her dad. So can you help me now, Dad? She asked, only to see her father looking down at her with a very disappointed look. Mineko, would you say that to your mother? He asked, pulling his hand from her so he could stare at her full on. Mineko had never seen her dad look at her like this. Sure, she'd seen him disappointed in her for bad grades or doing something she wasn't supposed to when she was younger, but this disappointment, there was an edge of anger to it. I just said what I thought. Mom isn't that great at schoolwork. You were always the one to help me with my homework. Izuku's face didn't change as he looked at her. Sit down, Mineko, we need to talk, he said, taking a seat on the couch as Mineko took the opposite end. Your mother's told me what's been going on. You've been really cold to her, he says as Mineko shook her head. I've just been busy and so has she. It's not my fault we don't spend a lot of time together, Mineko said as Izuku sighed. I saw this happening, but I thought it was just something you'd grow out of, but you haven't, and your mother's been really patient with you. But enough is enough, you're hurting her feelings, Mineko, Izuku said as Mineko clenched her fist. That's not my fault, she just doesn't get me. You and me, Papa, we're alike, and I like that I can talk to you about anything, and I know you'll understand, but Mom never does. She doesn't understand me. We have nothing in common, she said, crossing her arms as Izuku nodded. She can't understand you if you don't let her, Mineko. Your mother wanted you more than anything in the world, Izuku said, leaning back. I did too, of course, but your mother put everything she had into having a baby. She even stopped being a hero for a while. This was back when I just doing small parts in TV shows and straight-to-video movies. When you were born, your mother couldn't have been happier. They had to sedate her just to get you out of her arms so she would sleep. She'd hold you and just stare at you like she could see the entire universe in your little body, Izuku said, smiling as he looked at Mineko. You're everything to your mother, but as you grew older you seemed to gravitate more to me, which made me happy and terrified. I'm pretty sure your mother is the reason my movie career took off so well. She wanted me out of the house so she could have you all to herself. Izuku chuckled to himself as he looked at Mineko. Your mother isn't perfect and neither am I, Mineko, but to her you are perfect, and it hurts that you won't let her in, Izuku said as he stood up, looking down at his daughter. Just think about what I said. I'm going to go out and get something for dinner, Izuku said, donning a pair of shades and a hat. God, I hope I don't get mobbed at the grocery store again. Last time I had to call Kirishima to plow everyone away so I could get out, he said, shaking his head as he left. Mineko sat on the couch, her father's words reverberating in her head as she sat back. It's not like she didn't love her mother, of course she did, but she just couldn't connect. Her mother seemed like such a free spirit, taking things as they come. She knew that wasn't the case considering her mother was a hero. I don't know why, she said, standing up as she walked down the hall, standing before her parents' bedroom. Mineko raised her hand and held it in the air, frozen. She couldn't bring herself to knock. Go away, Izuku, her mother shouted, jolting Mineko to speak. It's me, she said, physically cringing at how pitiful those words were. See, can I come in? She continued as silence greeted her. She sighed, about to walk away before the door was opened, showing her mother's tear-stained face. We should talk, Mineko said, not exactly sure how to go about this, but that seemed to be enough as her mother went back to the bed and sat down with Mineko following her. Mineko fiddled with her hands before stroking her hair, only to repeat the process. Her mother chuckled. You get that from both of us, she said blankly. Your father never knows what to do with his hands when he's nervous, and I talk with my hands, so you were doomed from the start. Sorry. Mina said as Maneko shook her head. I'm sorry, Mom. Maneko said as she leaned back. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. It's just odd. You want your dad's attention. Mina finished for her as she sighed, flopping back on the bed. I know, I've known for a while. It's not that you don't like me, but he's your dad who you hardly get to see, and I'm here every day. I know you don't mean anything about it, but it still hurts, you know. I always wanted to be a mom, and I had a daughter on the first try too. I was on top of the world. I tried to take pictures of the two of us right then and there. Maneko nodded. Dad told me they practically had to trank you to get me away from you. Mina chuckled and nodded. Oh yeah, your dad, the traitor that he is, distracted me with some stupid story, while the doctor injected me with sedatives. Imagine that my own husband was complicit in me getting roofied. Then again, we weren't married at the time, so I'll have to give him credit for not jumping ship then and there. Maneko was a little surprised to hear her parents weren't married before her birth, though it wasn't a big deal. Mina saw this and smiled as she poked her daughter's cheek. What, you thought me and your dad were married before you were born? Sorry sweetie, I and your dad were in love, but we didn't jump the broom until after you were born. It was hectic, him with his acting and me with my hero things. Hell, before we knew it, a year had passed, and there I was with a big pink belly and a boyfriend who was trying to baby-proof the air itself. Mina chuckled as she looked at her daughter, and Maneko looked at her, seeing themselves be reflected in the black eyes of the other. We don't get along because you're a lot like your dad used to be. Maneko arched her brow at this. What do you mean? Maneko asked, and Mina smirked. You only know the man your father is now, but back when I knew him I couldn't stand him. He was such an arrogant asshole. Then again, he and Bakugo were best friends, so why wouldn't he be? Sure, Izuku didn't have a quirk, but he made up for it in raw fucking charisma. He ran every drama club he was in, the star actor every single time. He was hot as cast iron and knew it. It irritated me every time he was around, but then I watched one of his performances and my god, it was beautiful. I saw that his pride and arrogance weren't just for show, he was damn good at what he did. I fell in love with him on that stage. Maneko looked at her mother, and the smile on her face was blinding. You hold yourself to a very high standard, Maneko, and hold others to that, and anyone who doesn't meet it isn't worth your time. I'm sure you see me as a goofball, someone who just slides through life, and I suppose for the most part I do, but not when it comes to you, Maneko. I won't ever not be serious with you. You're my daughter and I love you. Mina said before feeling her daughter hug her. I'm sorry, Mom, I'm so very sorry. I love you so much. She shouted as the two hugged and Mina laughed. I love you too, sweetie, she said, ruffling her daughter's maroon hair. Well, now that we've had a heart-to-heart, let's get something in our stomachs, Mina said, going and opening the bedroom door as Izuku fell onto the carpet. Izuku, were you eavesdropping on us? Mina said as Izuku shook his head. No, of course not, I was just about to open the door when you yanked me forward, he said as Mina eyed him. Yeah, tried that lie somewhere else, buddy. I know when you're acting, Mina said before kissing him on the forehead. Thanks for this, she whispered as she walked out of the room before Maneko did the same. You were right, Dad, Maneko whispered as she walked past him with a bounce in her step. Izuku simply shook his head. Women. Izuku Midoriya, #1 hero Deku and symbol of peace, lay in bed sleeping peacefully next to his wife and fellow hero Izuku Midoriya, also known as Uravity. As the two slept, their bedroom door slowly opened, permitting the entrance of a small figure that quickly snuck over to the edge of the bed, before beginning to float over the prone adults. Once the figure was directly over Izuku's stomach, they dropped like a cannonball, landing on the hero's abdomen, as Izuku's eyes bucked up. What, who's there? He shouted, sitting up as laughter could be heard. Pa, you're up, the boy shouted as Izuku clutched his chest. Choza, what are you doing? Izuku shouted as his wife next to him gave a soft giggle. Oh come on Izuku, you face down psychopaths and giant monsters, you're telling me our 7-year-old son scared you? She asked, getting out of bed in pink pajamas with a paw print pattern on them. House, open the windows, Izuku announced as the blinds started to lift of their own accord. I'm prepared for those things, Izuku. Nobody is prepared for a 7-year-old dive bombing on them while they're asleep, Izuku said as Choza laughed. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition, Choza shouted as Izuku arched a brow. Okay, no more old school TV for you, young man, Izuku said as he hefted his son and crawled out of bed carrying his son under his arm. Today's the day, right, Pa? Choza asked as Izuku walked out of the bedroom with a yawn. He knew exactly what his son was talking about. Today was the day of the UA Sports Festival, which Izuku was to make an appearance at, and that Choza would be able to attend in person. Normally Ida as Ingenium would make the appearance, or if they were really desperate they'd ask Ground Zero, but after the last time Izuku doubted that would happen again for a while. Yes, Choza, but it doesn't start for another. Izuku looked at the clock on the wall. 6 hours, Izuku said with a sigh. This was one of his off days that let him sleep in and spend time with his family, though even when he was off he was still working. He couldn't remember the number of times he'd been out with his family and rushed off to stop a crime. Oh, I can't wait, Choza said as Izuku set Choza down at the table. As he walked to the fridge he moved his hand as Black Whip shot from it to pull open one of the cabinets and grab a bowl, as Izuku opened the fridge to grab the milk. The bowl was slung onto the table in front of Choza, as Izuku turned around with the milk as he reached for a bag of cereal. He poured his son's breakfast as he sat down, placing the spoon in Choza's hand. "So cool, Pa," Choza said as Izuku smiled and ruffled his son's brown hair. Izuku took the moment to really look at his son. Choza had Ichako's brown hair, but displayed his green eyes and freckles. Not for the first time, Izuku was just amazed that he had a kid. He couldn't believe the life you lead sometimes, and watching Choza grow up was the most amazing part of it all. He could still remember holding the newborn boy in his arms. "How are you going to pick anyone for your agency at the sports festival?" Choza asked as Izuku shrugged. "Maybe just depends, I guess," he said as footsteps sounded, announcing the presence of Izuku Midoriya. "Of course you are Deku. You've been calling Kendo almost every day asking about her students," Izuku said as she went to the fridge and pulled out a bowl of soup that she put in the microwave. Izuku blushed at his wife casually blowing his cover. Izuku said, scratching his head. "Well, I guess you're not wrong," he said as he sat back thinking about what Kendo had told him, which was very little. She didn't want to give Izuku any bias since he was the #1 hero now. He sighed a little at that. Being the #1 hero sometimes meant you had to be out of the loop. He'd lost count of the times he'd been sidelined on missions due to their coverdness. "How will I go to UA like you?" Choza asked, looking at his father as Izuku smirked. "If you work hard, of course you can, and me and your mother would be so proud," he said as Choza smiled brilliantly before finishing off his cereal. Choza looked at the large gate before him as he held hands with his mother. Ichaku was dressed in her hero suit, while Choza was dressed in green shorts and a white t-shirt with a D on the front. As the two entered the gate, Ichaku turned waving at someone as she nearly dragged Choza behind her. "Mr. Aizawa, it's good to see you, it's been so long," Ichaku shouted as she ran up to a long-haired man who looked in desperate need of a nap. His black locks were tinged with gray, as was the stubble on his chin. He wore a wrinkled suit as he looked at Ichaku. "Uraka, it's good to see you as well. Where's that husband of yours? There are some things I'd like to talk to him about that rescue he pulled off last week. It was sloppy. He's getting too reckless." Aizawa said, his eyes flashing red for a moment as Ichaku began to sweat. "I'll let him know, Principal Aizawa," said Ichaku, a bit mortified about being admonished by her old teacher as a grown woman, and for something she didn't even do. Aizawa looked down at the brown-haired boy by Ichaku's side. "Is this your son?" Aizawa said as Ichaku nodded happily. "Yes, this is my son Choza. Say hi, Choza," Uraka instructed as Choza gave a shy smile and wave. "Hello, Principal Aizawa," Choza said, to which Aizawa nodded. "Fine manners he has. You've raised him well, Ichaku," Aizawa said, giving a slight nod as he left to attend to other business. "Oh, thank God, even after all these years Mr. Aizawa is still terrifying as ever," she said as Choza felt a tap on his shoulder and looked to see no one was there, only to be bumped into from his right. "Hey, Choza," a blonde girl said from his right. Choza gave a smile as he recognized the girl. She was dressed in a pink shirt and yellow skirt with blonde flowing hair and sandals. "Oh, hi, Mitoka," Choza said as the blonde girl gave a smile, only to be joined by her parents, Nashira Ojiro and Toru Higakure. "So this is where you got to, Mitoka," Ojiro said as he looked to Ichaku. "Hello, Ichaku," Ojiro said, only to be outdone by his wife, who hugged Ichaku. "Ichaku, it's so good to see you. How have you been?" Toru said as Ichaku giggled before giving the scoop on her latest activities. As the adults spoke, they were joined by more familiar faces. "Hey, look who it is," shouted Kirishima as he walked up with Mina and their daughter Shina. Shina had deep red hair similar to her father's pink skin like her mother, and a pair of 5-inch alabaster horns above her red hair. She was dressed in jeans and a muscle shirt similar to what her father wore, and sneakers. "Mitoka, Choza, you're here too. This is so cool. I thought I was going to be the only kid here," said Shina. "Oh yeah, I hear your dad is going to be doing the opening for the sports festival. That must be awesome. I bet you have a box seat or something, hun?" Shina asked as Choza shrugged. "I don't know, I just can't wait to see all the cool quirks out there," Choza said as the group of adults and children made their way to the stadium before breaking off into their seats. Choza and Ichaku made their way up to a box seat and opened the door to see yet another pair of familiar faces. Shoto Todoroki and his wife Momo Yorozu. "Shoto, Momo, I wasn't expecting to see you here," Ichaku said as Shoto gave a nod. "I didn't think we would make it either, but things suddenly quieted down, giving us a rare chance to catch the sports festival. I'm hoping to procure a few students for my agency," Shoto said as Ichaku scoffed. "Yeah right, Shoto, you're the #2 hero. Kids are going to be lining up around the block to work at your agency, and you, Momo, did the world of big business. Take a breather too," Ichaku asked as she sat in one of the open seats. "Well, the sports festival caters to one and all. I decided to take a look, see if there were any young geniuses in the supporter business courses." Ichaku nodded at Momo's explanation. As the adults talked, Choza walked over to the other occupant of the room, a boy about the age of Choza with red and black hair split down the middle. He was dressed in shorts and dress shoes with a button-down shirt. He cast his blue eyes over to Choza. "Choza," Renji Todoroki said as Choza gave a small wave. "Hey Renji, your parents got to come to the festival too, I see." Renji gave a nod. Yes, father and mother made many assurances that we would be able to come here as a family, though I can't say I feel all that treated. He said, looking at his parents chatting with the Chaco. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the UA Sports Festival. I hope all of you are ready to have your socks blown off by our talented students, but before we begin I would like you all to give a special welcome to Deku. Shouted an aged, but still vivacious present Mick as in the sky a green streak zoomed over the stadium, creating a sonic boom before entering the stadium. There stood the number 1 hero Deku in his green and black bodysuit as his cape fluttered behind him. Deku stood up straight, presenting his glorious smile to the crowd. Thank you everyone for coming and showing your support for all these students. Some of you attended this same sports festival in your school years, and can attest that UA holds nothing back when it comes to their students, and why should they? These are the future heroes of tomorrow. They will face hardships and obstacles that will test their very souls, but I know that each and every one of them will look those challenges in the eye and say 2 words. Deku took a deep breath along with the crow. Plus Ultra. Choza was smiling from ear to ear while his dad was on stage. He was just so proud to be his son, that he almost didn't notice Renji slipping outdoor. Taking a moment to decide, Choza followed after Renji. Renji, what are you doing? Choza asked as Renji looked over his shoulder. You noticed me? I guess that's good. If they saw you and not me they'd get suspicious, so come on. I learned about a secret space hidden in the stadium. I heard about it from some seniors when we arrived. It's supposedly a hiding place where all the winners of the sports festival deposit something from their year. Choza cocked an eyebrow. What's so special about that? Choza asked, following after Renji. What's so special? Think, Choza. Imagine all the hidden treasures that the top students from UA have hidden in the stadium. Special techniques, rare collectibles, or secret information. Who knows what's hidden in these walls? Renji said excitedly as Choza's eyes began to sparkle. I guess that is pretty cool, he said as Renji nodded. Now come on, let's find it, Renji said as the two began to explore the stadium. Izuku made his way to the spectator box where Chaco was waiting, and came in to be surprised by Momo and Shoto. Shoto, glad you made it, Izuku said, shaking hands with Shoto, who gave a curt smile. That was quite the speech, Izuku. You don't look it, but you're quite the orator, Todoroki said as Izuku scratched his head. Oh thanks, it took me forever to come up with that speech, he said, looking around and not seeing Choza anywhere. Chaco, where's Choza? He asked as Momo looked around, not seeing Renji either. And where's Renji? She asked, only for an explosion to be heard in the center of the stadium, the turf having been blown up, and standing there was a large villain. He was incredibly muscular, and his head was shaved. He had a radioactive symbol tattooed on the back of his neck, and in his arms were Renji, Todoroki, and Choza Midoriya. The man was surrounded by a horde of villains, all of whom grinned menacingly at the crowd. Deku! Shouted the man as he hoisted the 2 boys in his arms. An explosion was heard as the front of the spectator box burst open, and in the arena stood Deku as green lightning arced around him. I will thank you to kindly let go of my son, Izuku said, his green eyes burning with righteous fury. The villain laughed. My name is Shockzone, and I have no interest in these pathetic wastes of space. I'm here for you and only you, symbol of peace. It has come to my attention that you have weakened over the years. You are no longer the overwhelming force you once were, and I will not stand for it. The cause of this is simple, it's this thing here. The villain growled, hoisting Choza by the collar of his shirt. And that slut there, he said, pointing at Chaco. They've made you weak, but don't worry, I'm here to help you get back to the hero you once were. Deku growled as he clenched his fist. The smile he always wore was gone and replaced by a rictus of anger. I will release your son and this boy here if you can survive my army and reach me. If you do that single-handedly, I will release your son and allow myself to be killed by you. My blood will baptize your rebirth, Deku, and if any of you heroes try to interfere, this whole stadium goes up in smoke. This is only for the real hero here, not you fakes and posers. Deku stepped forward as he stared at the horde of villains. I accept your challenge. I will defeat you all, Deku growled. Choza looked at his father, and never had he seen such anger on his face. It kind of scared him. Is that really my dad? He asked himself as the villain laughed. Good, well, you heard him, man, go forth, he shouted as the army of villains ran forward, pounding across the field, as Deku slowly walked forward as green lightning arced around him. Right as the villains reached him, an explosion of colors burst forth as the villains were thrown back in an instant. The villain who held Choza grinned maniacally. Yes, 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 he shouted as Deku appeared in front of him. Choza and Renji were dropped to the ground as the villain reared back. This is the hero I want, the unstoppable force that is Deku. The villain punched, but his arm crumpled in midair as Deku's hand moved at his side covered in blood. Shockzone fell to his knees looking at his destroyed limb, but even through the intense pain he laughed and smiled. You punched my arm, destroying it before I could even activate my vibration quirk. I knew you needed this. This is your power, Deku, now do it, kill me, Shockzone said, throwing his arms wide before Izuku gripped him by the neck. You kidnapped my son, and threatened the lives of everyone here. You did all of this for a fight, Deku shouted as Shockzone frowned and shook his head. I did all this for you. You were weak. That family of yours was nothing more than weights dragging you down to a human level when you were a god. I needed you to see that you didn't need them or anyone. You're not meant to be shackled, let all your power run. Will Deku's fist slammed into Shockzone's face, as the villain flew back into the side of the arena, his body embedded in the concrete. You're wrong, shouted Izuku as he turned to his son. My family and friends make me stronger than I've ever been. I won't let you or anyone else take them from me. Choza looked at his dad as he picked him up in his arms. The sports festival would have to be postponed after everything that happened, and so the bombs could be removed, but everyone was assured that things would resume tomorrow. Choza stood in front of his mother as Achako assailed him with her disappointment and worry about him just wandering off without her permission or supervision. He was told that Renji would be getting the same. Achako left Choza's room, leaving the little boy to stew on the events of today. He heard his bedroom door open and thought his mother would be making an encore appearance, but instead it was his dad. Hey Choza, Izuku said, coming to sit at his son's side. Your mother was in rare form today. I haven't seen her that emotional since she was pregnant with you, he said, smiling softly. Don't take it too hard, she was just worried, Izuku said, rubbing Choza's hair as his son leaned against him and gave a sniffle. I didn't want to cry in front of mom, Choza said as Izuku felt moisture sinking into his t-shirt. The boy must have been terrified of what was going, and Izuku couldn't blame him, but the fact that Choza held in his worries and fears until now spoke volumes. That was really brave of you. I'm sure your mom would have lost it at that point, Izuku said, swallowing the lump in his throat as he activated his float quirk, and he and Choza floated out of the window before flying up above the clouds. Now you can let it out and no one will hear you, Izuku said as he cradled his crying son. It's okay Choza, I won't let anyone hurt you, that's a promise, Izuku whispered, holding his head against his son's so Choza wouldn't see the tears in his own eyes. He'd been so worried and scared that he wouldn't be able to save his son, but thankfully everything had turned out alright. Heroes from around the world were making their way to one place, and that place was Island for the yearly Expo. The main attraction of the expo was the man holding it this year, Izuku Midoriya, the young genius said to be the successor to David's shield, in more ways than one, having married his daughter. The young genius was famous the world over for being a humanitarian through and through. Izuku didn't build support items for heroes, instead supporting the police force with his grand inventions, and building new medical equipment to aid in surgery. In all his years as an inventor, Izuku had never built a weapon. He was responsible for dropping the officer mortality rate lower than it's been in decades, as well as raising the success rate for some of the riskiest surgeries, so it was no wonder that many of the attendees here were cops and doctors from around the world. The attendees took their seats as Izuku walked onto the stage. He was dressed in a black suit with an emerald green tie that matched his hair and eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for making the trip to Island once again, and thank you for keeping the lights on for us for another month. I tell you, science isn't cheap, he said to the laughter of the crowd. But in all seriousness, my wife and I do thank you for coming all this way, he said, giving a modest bow. There are a lot of bright minds on this island, and I hope you give them a chance to wow and astound you with their inventions. This expo means the world to me personally. It was at an expo like this that I was given the chance of a lifetime by David Shield to study and learn under one of the greatest minds of our time, Izuku said. Now then, before the waterworks start, let me give you a taste of what I've been working on, because obviously this is all one big chance for me to show off as well, Izuku said, getting another laugh from the crowd as he waved to the side, and a large man came out with a minigun, which led many to gasp, and several heroes to stand. Hold on everyone, I assure you that you are all completely safe. This is my assistant and he's here to demonstrate my latest invention, Izuku said before looking at his assistant. I know I said get the biggest gun you could carry, Clyde, but I think the Americans are going to miss their railgun, he said with a chuckle before raising his hand palm out. Okay, enough comedy, let it rip, Clyde, Izuku said as his assistant pulled the trigger of the gun as it began to spin before spitting out bullets. People watched as the bullet slammed into something and bounced off, littering the stage for a few seconds before the gun stopped. The crowd stood stupefied as Izuku shook his hand before turning it to the crowd to show a shield of energy. This, ladies and gents, is my new invention. I call it my mag shield. This baby can withstand explosives and gunfire by repelling any metal it comes into contact with. It's solar powered and lasts for about a day. This will be issued to the police force by the end of the year. No more ice shields for our boys in blue, no more bulletproof vests that leave you with broken bones and bruised organs, everyone, he said with a smile as he held out his hands. Make sure this is on your Christmas list, he said as the entire room burst into applause. Izuku walked off stage to be greeted by his wife. Izuku, that was perfect, she said as the two enjoyed a quick kiss. Perfect doesn't begin to cover it, Melissa, that was divine. The shield worked even better than I thought it would, he said, smiling as he looked around. Where is Alexander? Izuku asked as Melissa looked to the side, whistling as Izuku frowned. He's not here yet, is he? I swear that boy begged me for this. Dad, give me a spot on stage. Dad, I've got something great to show. Izuku, give him a chance. Those were your words, right? And now here we're less than half an hour from his presentation, and he's not even on site, Izuku said as Melissa sighed. I've been calling him, but he's not picking up. Do you think something has happened? She asked as Izuku rolled his eyes. I doubt it. He has 20 minutes before his segment starts. If he's not here in 15, I'm cutting his presentation. This is ridiculous. Izuku said as Melissa crossed her arms. Excuse me, if I recall there was a certain green-haired student that was never on time for class, and nearly flunked out from tardiness if memory serves. Melissa said as Izuku looked over his shoulder and smiled before cupping her chin. First of all, I was smarter than any of our teachers, we both were, and secondly, how else was I supposed to get you attention? He asked, stroking her chin before going off to check on something. He thinks he's so smooth. Melissa huffed before smiling and blushing before pulling out her phone and trying to call her son again. Pick up Lex, she said. Alexander Midoriya heard his cell go off in the corner and looked up with his face hidden behind a welder's mask. I heard you the first time, Mom, he said, pulling up the mask and looked at the nearest clock. About 20 minutes, I've still got time, though I should probably leave sooner. No doubt Dad is pissed and is thinking about cutting my part if I don't show up, he said with a smile. Not a chance, old man, this is my year, Alexander said happily as he looked over his invention, the winning invention in his opinion. He looked down at it, running a hand down its smooth surface, and smiled. Oh yeah, it's all coming together. Alexander was a tall young man with curly blonde hair and blue eyes. He took after his mother, it seemed, but his height and lankiness was all his father. Lex was dressed in a black muscle shirt and jeans, and his hair was tied back into a long ponytail. Izuku walked around the expo, leading prospective buyers around by the nose, practically as they asked about his shield, but he refused to answer any questions until the end of the expo, and instead forced the buyers to student presentations. Admittedly, any one of these inventions would probably win first place anywhere besides here. That was why so many came to Island. This was the bleeding edge of technology. If it didn't come from here, it wasn't bad, but it was great. An alarm went off in Izuku's ear as he looked at his watch, showing that it had been exactly 15 minutes. Well, sorry son, you had your chance and you blew it, Izuku said as he tapped his communicator, bringing up the event planners. Strike Alexander from the list. All of a sudden there was a sonic boom that rocked the venue slightly as something flew through the sky, performing loops and corkscrews, before careening down onto stage, and landed in a kneeling position before coming to his full height. The object in question was a man in a skin-tight suit that conformed to the wearer. It was predominantly black with a green W on the front of the suit. Ladies and gentlemen, I present tonight's main attraction. Me, shouted Alexander as he pulled the face mask off to reveal his face. Izuku looked at his son on stage in a suit of high-tech armor suit. Yes everyone, it is I, Alexander Midoriya, or as you will come to know me as Warforged, he said as the suit changed, displaying a long-sleeved shirt and jeans with sneakers. This suit is bulletproof, fireproof and waterproof up to 1 league. The suit is powered by a solar battery and hosts a variety of weaponry, including one of my own design, he said, opening his palm and firing a blast from it that cracked a solid stone column. And that was on stun. Imagine decimating debris to rescue victims of accidents. As you see, this suit comes equipped with a cloaking mechanism and can mimic any fabric or just turn you invisible, Alexander said as his body disappeared, leaving a floating head to continue speaking. This suit augments all my physical abilities by 10, with the help of servo motors, that puts no extraneous effort on me. The suit is controlled by synaptic responses, which means this baby moves as fast as my mind, he said with a smile. Izuku walked forward towards the stage as his son showed off more aspects of his suit, until Izuku stepped on stage and stood in front of his son, before turning to face the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all enjoyed this sneak peek at my son's ingenuity, but that will be all for now, he said before turning to his son with a disappointed glare. You and I need to talk right now, he said angrily as he led Alexander away behind the stage curtain. Izuku turned around to look at Alexander, who had a bit of concern on his face. Dad, what's the problem? I came on time, and I showed off a really cool invention. Why are you mad? He asked as Izuku pinched the bridge of his nose. Alexander the First gave you a chance to present a world-changing invention, and all you did was show off another weapon. I want you to use your knowledge to better the world, not just add more things for people to hurt one another with. We have a gift, Alexander, arguably the most power ability in the world. With our minds we steer the future of the world. Sure, we could spend our time creating weapons, but all that does is spread violence. Alexander pulled his arm away from his father and looked at him. This is always how it is with you. Nothing I do is ever good enough for you, Dad. I spent a year working on this and everybody loved it. Why don't you? I know why. You don't want to share the spotlight. It has to be you or nobody, right? Well, that's not fair, Dad. You can't be the only genius. You only gave me this chance because you were so sure that I wouldn't be able to beat you at this, but I did. Your stupid shield can't compare to my armor, and you know it, Alexander said before blasting the rockets on his boots and left through the nearest skylight. Izuku facepalmed and turned around, nearly running into Melissa. Melissa shook her head. No, Izuku, you need to talk with your son. I'll handle the expo. Contrary to what you think, I'm quite the showwoman, she said, straightening her lab coat. You and Alex have been on this course for a while, and I'm not going to let you veer off course. You two are so like it's kind of scary. I sometimes wonder if you just cloned yourself and used me as a surrogate. She said with a laugh as Izuku laughed. Oh come on, if I did that I would have just went full test tube baby and saved money on all those dinners. He said with a slight chuckle before seeing the look on Melissa's face. I'm joking, thank you for giving birth to our child. He said wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead before running out of the venue. Melissa scratched her nose. Damn right, thank you, 12 hours of labor, you should be throwing me a parade. She said walking back out to the audience. Izuku looked around for signs of his son before facepalming once again. Izuku, you are a scientist. He said raising his wrist to the sky. All Might scan for any ion trails leaving the expo venue and follow them. He said as from his wrist an inch high All Might hologram appeared and began looking around. I have located the trail. It is proceeding in a northwest fashion terminating at the observatory. The hologram said in All Might's booming voice. Goes to show you can never take the fan out of the boy. Izuku smiled. Thank you, All Might. Izuku said as the hologram bowed and dissipated with a final plus ultra. Izuku raced to the observatory, which was closed until tonight when it would be open to the public for the view of Mars, which would be visible during the expo. Izuku walked into the observatory and made his way to the roof. He was greeted by the sight of his aunt in a bodysuit and a suitcase next to him. Is that how your suit breaks down? Izuku said as Alexander looked at the suitcase and shook his head. It may be an exoskeleton of electronic circuits, but it can be folded like normal clothes. Alexander said, opening the suitcase to show off his folded suit. Izuku sighed as he sat down. Lex, did you know that I wanted to be a hero when I was your age? I dreamed about it, but after I found out I didn't have a quirk, I decided to push in a new direction. I began applying myself to the sciences and found out that there's not much difference between heroes and officers of the law, and yet cops aren't given nearly as much support as they need. He said, looking at a group of police. I hated that, so I worked to change it. Like you, I thought about weapons. New guns, tasers and the like. It got me noticed, but do you know what happened afterwards? Those weapons I created wound up on the streets, making the problems worse, so I turned away from weapon making and went for different improvements. New body armor for the police, better temperature control suits for firemen, hell I even built a few new machines to help hospitals at cheaper costs. That's how I chose to help people, Lex, and it's true I don't really like the idea of you walking around dressed in a WMD, but that doesn't make it any less amazing that you made this yourself. Izuku said with a cough as he patted his son. I just worry for you is all. Like your mother and I, you are quirkless, and even with the suit you'll be at a significant disadvantage, but I now realize that what you do with this suit is your choice. You are a genius after all. Izuku said, ruffling his son's hair. Alright dad, alright, I get it. Lex said as Izuku leaned back. I'm proud of you son no matter what, remember that. He said with a grin. This morning as I lay in the arms of a man called Dada, or at least that's what he keeps wanting me to call him. He's a big guy with long green hair down to his shoulders and freckles. He's rocking me some, which is slowly lulling me to sleep as we looked at the woman called Mama. Again, this is what she keeps wanting me to call her. She's dressed in some kind of suit that's tied to her body. She has long blue hair and bright eyes. She's smiling wide as in talking really fast. I'll try to be home as fast as I can, okay, because I don't want to miss any more off this little cutie pie. Isn't that right, Izumi? Mama said as she kissed my face all over and then kissed Dada once. I don't know if anyone's keeping score, but I got a lot more kisses than Dada did. Alright, bye Izuku, bye Izumi. Oh, and Izuku, send me pictures or video, yeah, send me videos. Okay, bye. Mama zoomed off away from us as Dada waved tiredly and gave a big yawn. What do you say we get some sleep, hun kiddo? He asked before shutting the door and heading to the bedroom. This was pretty standard actually. Sometimes it was Mama in the weird costume and flying off, other times it was Dad turning into fire and blazing off. Today just seemed to be Dada's day to stay home. Dada crawled back under the covers with me laying down next to him close to the wall. This wasn't a bad idea honestly, I was still tired from spending a night crying. I mean, what else is there to do when your bottom half is all wet? I'd do something about it myself if I knew how to take off this stupid thing they keep putting on me, but so far I'm stuck with it and have to wait for Dada or Mama to change it for me. I fell asleep listening to Dada's heartbeat as he pulled me against his chest. It wasn't the best pillow. Dada is hard, not soft like Mama's chest, but his heartbeat makes a good lullaby. I'm being jostled for some reason. I whine telling Dada to stop moving and he does, but right before I cannot back off he moves again. I sigh inwardly, guess snap time's over. I open my greenish blue eyes and see Dada. He's holding me in one arm and trying desperately to eat a bowl of cereal with the other, while holding the bowl in his lap. He sees me looking at him and smiles with milk running down his chin. Hey, Izumi. He says, putting the spoon down as he puts me against the arm of the couch so I can sit up. Did you sleep good? He asks. No complaints, I guess. I say, though I know he can't understand me. I could have the secret to world hunger and they'd never know. That's good. Well, it's just you and me, sweetheart. What do you want to do? Dada asks. I think on his question for a moment. Oh, I know, let's go to the park. I love the park. I say, and as usual he completely overrules me. Grocery shopping, that's a wonderful idea, Izumi. Because someone around here has been going through a lot of diapers. Dada says and I huff. Well, it's not like I asked you to buy them and put them on me. I say, and for once Dada seems to understand me. Oh, I know it's not your fault, sweetie. He said, rubbing my head and then tickling me under the chin. I couldn't help but giggle even though I was still upset with him. He soon made up with me fully by giving me spoonfuls of the milk after eating all the cereal. After that Dada got dressed and then it was my turn. I don't like when Dada dresses me. He doesn't let me pick like mama does, and his fashion choices leave a lot to be desired. He picks the plainest stuff. I wound up being dressed in a beige shirt and some blue leggings that covered me from foot to waist. I hate these things, they make my toes disappear. I tried to pull them off, but they were on too well. Izumi, no, you can't go outside with no pants, it's not good for a lady. Dada says and I sigh before perking up as I remember how Dada likes to get around. I smile and giggle, clapping my hands. This gets Dada's attention and he smiles. Oh, what are you excited to go shopping? He asks before picking me up and bouncing me in his arms as we walk to the front door. No, Dada, I want to fly. I say, and Dada surprises me by understanding what I say. You just want to fly, don't you? Well, you are your mother's daughter, she loves to fly too. He says as he locks the door behind us. I look down as Dada's feet light on fire and climbed up his legs, making his waist disappear in a mass of flames before blasting us into the sky. I scream with excitement as Dada laughs. You're such a silly girl, Izumi. Dada says as we roar through the sky. Everything looks so small from up here, and as someone who's not even a foot tall, that's saying something. Dada must have known how much I like flying, because we stayed in the sky a lot longer than it should have taken us to reach the grocery store. We landed outside of a big building with blue on the front, and there was a yellow symbol on the front. I have no idea what the white things were on the front. We walked in and Dada got one of those card things, but before he even brought me close to it, he wiped it down with a towel or something. I groaned internally, whatever those things are, they make the cart smell weird, and Dad used like 3 of them. He placed me in the cart and we were off. I looked around at all the stuff as Dad put things into the cart. I recognized some things like those cup things. They had applesauce in them. Me and Mom loved those. Then things got cold as we got ice cream. Dada began laughing as he picked up one of the ice cream pints. Oh man, how did Ben and Jerry get Todoroki to do this? He asked, looking at the ice cream. On the front was a man with white and red hair, and he was holding a flaming cherry in his left hand and a frozen vanilla bean in the other. Spicy cherry vanilla. He said with a laugh as he took out his phone and took a photo before sending it to someone. He placed a pint in the cart. I have no idea why that was so funny, but I like watching Dada laugh. Finally we went to the dreaded diaper section. I sighed, it was like picking out your own handcuffs. Dada picked up a few different brands. Look at that, they have Uravity and Froppy on diapers. I guess it fits. He said before holding up each one to me. Alright, Izumi, Froppy or Uravity? He asked. At least this time I recognized who was on these. I looked back and forth from the pink to the green, and after careful consideration, I slapped my left hand on the railing. Uravity. I said as Dada nodded and grabbed several packs of the Uravity diapers. You know what, I should take a picture. He said before handing me a pack of diapers. Hold this for Daddy, okay, Izumi? Dada said as I looked at the diapers, holding on to them as tight as I could. Look at Dada, Izumi. Dada said, getting my attention right before a flash went off as Dada took my picture and then sent it off to Nejire and Uravity. You cutest fan. Izuku said out his text before sending it to Uravity. I think that's it, Izumi, let's head home. He said as we went to the checkout, but things didn't go as planned. We were about to check out when someone screamed. Dada looked away from me and zeroed in on what the issue was. Apparently some guy was running in the store with a lot of green paper in his arms. Even I know that's dangerous, he could trip, and my dad was not happy about that. I saw my goofy dad change into a more serious version of himself. He turned to the nearest cashier. Watch her. He commanded as the cashier jumped to attention. Yes, sir. The cashier shouted as Dad ran off. Dad turned into fire and flew in front of the guy, bursting back to normal. I couldn't hear what Dad said, but apparently the guy didn't want to be punished and fell to his knees. Yeah, nobody wants to get a spanking. I thought to myself as the guy was taken away and everyone clapped for my Dada. Man, Inferno is the coolest. My new babysitter said. I have no idea who he was talking about, but my Dada was awesome. Dada walked over to my temporary babysitter to pick me back up. Oh, thank you, Inferno, we would have had no way to stop that villain. The store manager said as people crowded around Dada and I. No problem, it's my job. He said before fishing in his pocket for his bank card. Now just let me pay for these and I'll be on my way. Dada said, only for the manager to push his hand away. We couldn't think about it, sir, please take your purchases and our humble thanks. The manager said, bowing as my Dada looked at him and then his card as if confused before giving a small smile. Thank you. Dada said as he walked out of the store, stopping to give an autograph here or there, before rocketing the two of us into the air again. We came back home and Dada put me down on the floor, leaving me to my own devices while he put everything away. This was my chance. I was free to do as I pleased. The day continued like that for me and Dada. After a while Mama returned and scooped me up as she floated around the house. Did you have fun today, Izumi? Mama missed you so much. Mama said, squeezing me to her chest as Dada sat on the couch with a smile, as Mama floated the two of us into his lap. So I hear you had time to babysit and be a hero. Stopping a robbery at the market. Is there nothing you can't do? She asked, pinching his cheek as Dada blushed. I do what I can. Dada said as Mama giggled before looking at Izumi. Izumi, what do you think? Can your mama pick him or can she pick him? Nejire said as I looked between the two of them. You know this deserves a real response, but what should I say? Well, we are talking about Dada, so. Dada. I said with a giggle as both Mama and Dada looked at me in shock. Mama's eyes rolled to Izuku. That's not fair, Izuku, what did you do? Would she say your name first? Mama asked heatedly as she poked Dada, causing him to laugh as he confessed to doing nothing special. Mama and Dada are so funny. I thought to myself as I watched them. It was the school festival of UA High School. The place was in full swing, but no course was more fired up than the support course. This was their time to shine, and they intended to take full advantage of the opportunity. Every support course member was in a building frenzy, but none could come close to the manic energy produced by the unofficial leader of the support course, Izuku Midoriya. This girl with her auburn hair tied back into a singular ponytail was hard at work in a crop top and jeans. Her eyes were zeroed in on her invention. This is totally going to knock my parents' socks off, she said with a proud grin that inspired her fellow classmates. Man, she's really fired up. Hey, have you seen Mr. Power Loader? One girl asked. The cross-campus Power Loader was in the Principal Nezu's office. You can't be serious about having the two of them here. I don't know if the school can survive it. Power Loader shouted as Nezu smiled gently. Come now, Power Loader, it can't be that bad. Besides, you should be happy to see your former students. Nezu said as Power Loader shook his head. I'm telling you this now, Nezu, if you have all the two of them in one place, there's no telling how much damage they'll wreak. Trust me, I know I was their teacher. Power Loader said, but knew it was no use. Nezu had already made up his mind, so the best he could do was offer a compromise. At least have them followed and surveilled, if not for me then for the hundreds of other people here. Power Loader stressed as Nezu sighed. Fine, I'll have them chaperoned, he said, shaking his head. Honestly, Power Loader, I'm shocked you have so little faith in you. An explosion sounded near the front gate of UA, as Power Loader shook his head. It's too late, he whispered. Standing at the epicenter of the smoke clouds stood the top couple in support items, Izuku and Mei Midoriya. Izuku coughed, waved smoke from his face as he combed his long shaggy green hair from his face. Okay, so maybe my new battery was too much for the cotton candy machine, but it's not like your infrared probe did much better on the corn dogs, Izuku said as Mei wiped pieces of exploded franks and batter from her lab coat. Izuku was dressed in a t-shirt and shorts covered by a lab coat and sneakers. His hair was long and kept back in a messy ponytail. He had stubble on his face, and the lab coat was wrinkled. Touché, husband, but the day is far from over, Mei said, smiling at Izuku with a competitive gleam in her eyes that was mirrored by her husband. Mei was also in a wrinkled lab coat, but in addition hers was stained with oil, grease and few more unknown stains. Under that she had on a deep blue shirt and baggy camo pants with boots. Quite right, Mei, there are so many more people our inventions can help. It's a plethora of guinea pigs, Izuku said with a creepy grin. So whose life should we advance next? Izuku asked as Mei thought about that for a moment before smiling. I think the candy apple stand could benefit from my baby number 3007, the Octo Arms, Mei said as she pulled out a large case from the hovering cart behind the two, hauling dozens of cases. It appeared to be a large case until Mei walked up to the candy apple stand. Thanks for stopping by. Care for a candy app. The student was cut off as Mei jumped over the counter and pressed the device against his chest, which unfolded to wrap around his torso as 8 more arms unfolded from the sides of the device. What is this thing? The student yelled. Don't panic, these are going to make your job so much easier. I've quadrupled your work output. All you have to do is perform your duties normally, and the arms will take in the information and then mimic you. You'll be able to run this stall by yourself, Mei said as the student looked at her before following her instruction and began to make more candy apples. After 2 repetitions, the arms came to life and began performing the same actions. Wow, lady, you're right, this is so much easier and faster, he said as Izuku crossed his arms. That's luck is all, he complained as he looked around and then snapped his fingers. I've got it, he said, pulling a case from the pile and opening it, revealing a plain-looking spatula, but Mei recognized the piece of cutlery and pouted. Hey, that's ours, she shouted, trying to take it back as Izuku shook his head. Sacrifices must be made, my love. Besides, this is the prototype. I've already finished the improved version, he said with a proud grin as he walked over to the yakisoba stand. Excuse me, my boy, I see you working pretty hard there. What if I told you I could triple the work, and it would only require you to use one hand? Izuku asked as the boy looked at him and smiled. I'm sure, man, that would be a big help. This yakisoba is selling pretty fast, the boy said as Izuku presented the unremarkable spatula to the boy. The boy in question gave a quizzical look at the spatula, and then Izuku. Oh, this just looks like a regular spatula, my dude, the boy said as Izuku nodded. Yes, but press the button on the bottom of the handle and see what happens. Izuku said, his eyes practically glowing with excited energy as the boy pressed the button, and out of the side sprang 2 additionally spatulas. But that's not all. Give the handle a squeeze, and that will activate its turbo drive that will double the already triple productivity it had. He explained as the boy gripped the spatula and began tossing the yakisoba on the grill, as the spatula's other attachments began flipping and tossing the noodles as well. The best part is you can still have one hand to do other things. This baby also has a built-in thermometer in the handle to let you know exactly what temperature whatever you're cooking is. The surface is resistant to heats well above what any stovetop can produce. It's not dishwasher safe, but with the molecular coating it has, there's hardly any effort to clean it. The couple swipes with a soapy towel, and it's clean as a whistle. He said as the boy smiled at the increased speed. Thanks Pops, you really helped us out. He said, looking to the other boy who'd been flipping yakisoba as well. You can take your break if you want, I can flip this stuff by myself now. He said as his junior rushed off. Izuku walked back to Mei and smirked. And even better about that little invention is that it's not nearly as bulky as the octopack you have that poor boy wearing. Izuku said as Mei grinned angrily. You're going down, Izuku. We have about an hour before Mizuki's presentation. Let's see who's the better science type. Mei said as the two began passing out invention after invention through the festival. Where the hell are they? Power Loader said, looking around before Eraser had pointed out the various gadgets. I think we can just follow the trail they left. He said as the two teachers walked through the festival, marveling at the various gadgetry. Mizuku looked at the field where her darling creation would be debuting. Their presentation was far too big for any of the gyms, so they petitioned for the arena where the sports festival is usually held. Yes, this will work out just fine indeed. She said as several students started bringing in large barrels. Just set those around the perimeter. She said as others came into the stadium. Mizuki, is everything ready? The girl asked as Mizuki smiled. Don't worry, I've got everything under control, just have everyone in position. She said as students in costume took place on stage. This will be for the record books. Mizuki said as she went into one of the corridors leading to the waiting rooms and placed a headset on her forehead. Izuku was panting as he took a seat in the large auditorium next to Mei. You know I won, right? He said as Mei huffed. As if my Insta-cold pills totally beat you. Mei said as Izuku scoffed. Listen here, my sweat clean is the best thing that ever happened to a high schooler, though it does need a better name. I mean, even you and I use it after an all-nighter. He said with a sigh and a shake of his head as many names flowed through his head. Putting that aside for the moment, we need to support Mizuki, she was really excited about this. He said as Mei nodded. Agreed, this discussion will be postponed for the moment. Mei said as lights illuminated the center of the field as a boy stepped out in a toga with a microphone for a mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, we the support course will be putting on a technological marvel, illustrating the Titanomichi, also known as the battle between the Olympians and the Titans. The boy said before moving off the field. On the other side of the field, several students pushed over plastic barrels, spilling tons of what appeared to be black sand on the field. What is that? Mei said before the sand began to move on its own, and before everyone's eyes the sand began to build the city of Thessaly, and at the opposite ends of the field were formed a pair of mountains. Atop each mountain sat a group of people. On the left end of the field sat the Olympians, and on the right end of the field sat the Titans. A debate was being held in each group as to why they should rule the universe. Soon the conclusion was reached that only one generation could rule, and that a war would be fought to decide it. The students playing their parts met in the middle of the city of Thessaly, and began to battle. Each student mimicked the power of the god or titan they were portraying with their support items. The boy playing Zeus hurled bolts of lightning with a pair of gauntlets that also allowed him to mimic flight by repelling himself from the ground, as another boy hurled waves of water as Poseidon that were only blue-colored versions of the black sand that made up the scenery. The boy playing Cronus swung a huge scythe that carved through everything. A boy playing Helios seemed able to produce beams of light from his hands as he blasted the Olympian army, as other students playing the Hecatan Shires had inventions that mimicked dozens of hands that hurled boulders of the black sand. The battle concluded with the black sand opening up under the Titans and swallowing them, presumably illustrating how the Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus. The play concluded with the entire support course taking a bow as people applauded. The boy with the microphone for a mouth walked back out. Thank you everyone. I would just like to say this play would have never come together without the input of Izuku Midoriya and her mini-droids. Mizuku stepped from out of the shadows, and as she did so her mini-droid split to open a path for her. Mizuki looked at the crowd and smiled as she noticed her parents, who clapped uproariously. There was a pause between the next showing which allowed Mei and Izuku to speak with Mizuki. So this is what you've been working on, is it? Izuku asked as he inspected a handful of mini-droids. And you say this headset controls every single one? He asked as Mizuki nodded. Yes Dad, this headset instructs all the droids to make a single thing or several things if you have enough, like the entire set for that play. She said as Izuku nodded. Ingenious, truly ingenious, Mizuki. He said, petting his daughter's head as Mei smiled and hugged her daughter. That's our girl. she said proudly before the door to Mizuki's waiting room was thrown over, showing a very upset power loader. Found you? He shouted, looking at Izuku and Mei. You two, I knew letting you in here was a bad idea. He shouted as Izuku and Mei looked at one another a little fearful. But power loader, we haven't done anything. Izuku said as power loader's eye twitched. Come with me and say that again. He said as he drug Izuku and Mei away. Mizuki followed after her teacher and was in complete shock at what she saw. There was a boy wrapped up in a pair of robotic arms as the other 6 hurled candy apples at the crowd. Then there was a boy who was being held aloft by a spinning spatula a dozen feet in the air. There was also a group of cheerleaders whose entire body was pink. As they guzzled water, their bodies were coated in foam. Power loader looked at Izuku and Mei. You still think you haven't done anything? He asked as Izuku and Mei rubbed the back of their heads. Well, maybe we did do a little. Izuku said as Mizuki sighed and closed her eyes. There was a rattling as a swarm of Mizuki's microdroids ran through the festival, grabbing the out-of-control spatula, as it formed a slide for the boy to get down to the ground safely. The swarm then tackled the bound boy swarming in between the arms, allowing the boy to slip free, as it held the other arms in place. Power loader watched Mizuki deal with the carnage with ease. Mom, Dad. You need to be careful about your gadgets, not everyone can handle them like we can. It's like giving a flamethrower to a kid. I can't believe you. She shouted, dressing down both their parents as Izuku and Mei held their heads in shame. Power loader watched in awe. Mizuki, you are my best student. He whispered as he watched the girl continue to admonish her parents. The girl by the name of Yoshikawa sat at the end of table in the disciplinary committee office. She wore the typical school uniform of her school, a black skirt and white button-down dress shirt. Her hands were in her lap as she fiddled with her fingers. Her green eyes looked up at the unreadable face of the disciplinary committee chairman. He had combed back black hair with rectangular glasses. He wore a dress shirt and black slacks. The room was darkened so much so she could almost lose track of the other boy in the room. She'd seen him around the school a couple times, but he didn't really stand out. He had deep green messy hair like moss. He just stood in the corner, his green eyes trained on her. It was like she was being x-rayed. Yoshikawa gave a cough. Mitsurugi, what's the purpose of calling me here? She asked as the Mitsurugi leaned forward and adjusted his glasses. First of all, thank you for coming, Yoshikawa. To answer your question, we've brought you here in regards to the incident that happened a few days ago. As you know, several days ago Mary Yaku was accused of stealing several pair of panties from the girls' locker room. One of those pairs being yours. Mitsurugi said as Yoshikawa shuddered. Yes, I remember, but that was taken care of. I hear that Mary is going to be sent away. It's what he deserves, the pervert. She said, crossing her arms. Mitsurugi looked at Yoshikawa. Yes, well, we have reason to believe that Mary was framed for this. What? Yoshikawa said, leaning forward with both her hands on the table. You can be serious, of course that little creep did it. Yoshikawa hissed. What makes you so sure? The boy in the corner said as he stepped forward in the dim light. His gaze was intense, so much so that Yoshikawa had to look away. I mean, it has to be him. What other sick individual would do such a thing? She asked, a bit cowed by the boy's gaze. That's a good question, and I have the answer, you. The boy said, pointing his finger straight at Yoshikawa. Are you insane? What do you mean, me? Are you saying I stole the girl's panties? She shouted before looking at Mitsurugi. Mitsurugi, who is this man and why are you letting him make baseless accusations against me? This is not what I would expect from the leader of the disciplinary committee leader. She said as Mitsurugi waved a hand to the boy beside him. Yoshikawa, this is Izuku Midoriya. He helps the disciplinary committee on difficult or strange cases. The boy stood up straighter. Now that the introductions are out of the way, let's get down to business. Yes, I am accusing you of thieving the girl's undergarments. Of course I have the evidence to back it up. The boy said as he took out a portfolio and arranged the photos within. First of all, our supposed thief Mary Yaku, an eccentric boy if I'm to be kind. He definitely has the air of a pervert, but he only had eyes for one girl, Yoshikawa. It's no secret that he's confessed to you multiple times, each time being rejected, but he's dogged in his pursuit of you. His constant affections caught the eyes of your classmates who began to tease you about it. That was something you could not allow. Suzuki placed his hands on the table and leaned towards Yoshikawa. So you came up with a plan to get rid of Yaku and get back at the girls who teased you about his confessions. That's ridiculous. If you're so sure about this, then where's the proof? You haven't shown me anything to prove I did this, and just so you know, my panties were stolen too. Are you saying I was willing to put my own panties in that creep's locker? She asked, outraged, as Suzuki smiled. Since you brought it up, no, I don't think you put your panties in Yaku's locker, because the panties you said were yours weren't, said Suzuki as Yoshikawa leaned back. Excuse me, I think I would know my own panties, she said as Suzuki nodded. Of course you would. After all, at the crime scene you said that the panties found were your favorite pair, which is something a number of girls corroborated. Now here's where I prove those panties weren't yours. You see, if in fact that pair of strawberry striped panties were your favorite pair, they would have much more wear and tear. Clothes suffer damage in the wash over time, and the more you wear them, the more you wind up washing them. Yet the pair found weren't faded, the waistband wasn't frayed, nothing. Even if you had bought the pair recently, there would be some indication they'd been worn at least once. It's as if the pair found in the locker were bought just to be put there. That's some flimsy evidence, wouldn't you say? Mitsurugi, is he really someone you trust with these complicated cases? She asked with a smirk. Suzuki took it in stride and smiled. Mitsurugi shrugged. He hasn't done anything to prove otherwise. Mitsurugi stated as he looked at Suzuki. Yet, I know a single piece of evidence does not a conviction make, but I have more. Second piece of evidence, I posited that you did this because you wanted Yaku gone, and to get back at the girls who teased you. There were several pairs of panties found outside of Yaku's locker. These were what led to Yaku's locker being opened. Those panties belonged to each of the girls who teased you the most about Yaku's obsession. Of course, this would be completely mortifying. They wouldn't be able to go around the school without everyone seeing their panties in their mind's eye. Yaku is not the smartest person in school. That honor belongs to yours truly, Suzuki said, placing a hand on his chest. Still, he's not so much of an imbecile that he'd leave a trail back to his stash. Furthermore, I've asked around to see if any other girl had problems with Yaku, and the shocking thing was that Yaku was a complete pervert up until this year. As soon as he laid eyes on you, his advances and perverse behavior towards other girls stopped. So why would a die-hard Yoshikawa addict steal anybody else's panties but yours? And before you say to cover his tracks, then why go so far as to stash all the panties in his locker? If you wanted to hide his scent, why not take just yours and ditch the others somewhere? Suzuki said, cutting off Yoshikawa's assault on his theory. Finally, the irrefutable evidence is that Yaku has an alibi, Suzuki said as Yoshikawa stood up. That's a lie. He never said anything about having an alibi. Suzuki smiled. Well, you see, his alibi is rather damning in and of itself, but after letting him know he might be facing lockup in a juvenile facility, he came clean. Suzuki pulled out his phone and showed the screen to Mitsurugi and Yoshikawa. What they saw was a scene of the swim club practicing their laps, and over the sound of splashing and lapping water was heavy breathing. During the time of the crime, Yaku was hiding in the towel bin and spying on Yoshikawa, as he, for lack of a better term, pleasured himself. This video is from Yaku's phone, sent directly to me. Just to be sure that this wasn't a fake, you can listen to some of the girls talking about a test she took that was scheduled for today, making the date of this video irrefutable. He has quite the library of videos of you. As if on cue, there was a low groan on screen. That's enough, Suzuki, Mitsurugi shouted as Suzuki turned off his phone, and Yoshikawa fell back into her chair and covered her mouth. That's disgusting. That's his alibi, she shouted as Suzuki nodded. Of course, Yaku will face some disciplinary action for that, but he's free of the crime of panty theft, leaving you who had motive and opportunity to take the fall. So Yoshikawa, what is your alibi for the crime? Suzuki said as Yoshikawa gripped her head. I just wanted him gone. Everyone kept teasing me, saying I should give him a chance or how cute we'd look together. The girls just wouldn't stop. I had to do something, she shouted as Suzuki stepped back, gathering his notes, and looked at Mitsurugi as the two left the office to make way for the principal. Good work, Suzuki, Mitsurugi said as Suzuki held out his hand. My payment, Suzuki said as Mitsurugi nodded. Of course, here you are, Mitsurugi said as he handed Suzuki an envelope. As always, pleasure doing business with you, disciplinary leader, Suzuki said as he walked off. As he did so, the Vice Student Council president came up to Mitsurugi. You pay him for this. He should be honored to assist us in these matters, Shiro said as Mitsurugi shook his head. The payment is a ruse, nothing more. He'd do this for free if it wasn't for his pride. I have no doubt that the only payment he really cares about is the thrill of investigation and the exhilaration of success. Suzuki left the school and opened the envelope and stared at the school pass and smiled. For the next month, Suzuki was excused from classes. It was only on the basis that he kept up with his schoolwork, which was hardly a stipulation. This was his payment: freedom from classes that were a waste of time for someone like him. He needed to be engaged at all times, which his classes were not capable of. He left the school grounds and headed to the 52nd precinct. He walked in as if the place was empty. You've heard the old adage, walk into a place as if you own it. Well, in Suzuki's case, it was walk into a place as if no one else was there, and this worked for the boy. He was hardly ever spotted, but it took practice and concentration to become invisible in the loosest sense of the word. Of course, invisibility wasn't Suzuki's quirk, but with effort he could erase his presence from those around him. He walked through the precinct until he arrived at an interrogation room. He placed his ear against the door, hearing the voice of his father, and smiled. He walked to the door next to it and slowly opened it just enough to slip in. Suzuki stood behind a trio of officers, and through the one-way mirror he could see the back of his father's head and the suspect. He slowly withdrew a notebook, preparing to write. Izuku Midoriya, 35 years of age and a detective of the Musatafu Police Department, 52nd Precinct. Come on, Garen, you might as well admit it. You killed Kikyo Senji, Izuku said as the man shook his head. What are you talking about? Kikyo was my best friend's wife. Why would I kill her? He asked, as Izuku looked at him and shook his head. Alright, guess we'll do this the hard way, Izuku said as he placed several crime scene photos on the table. It was a woman with blonde hair, and her head was twisted at an odd angle as she lay at the foot of some stairs. Garen looked away. Why are you showing me this? he asked as Izuku placed another object on the table. It was a plastic bag with several letters in them. At seeing them, Garen's face went a little pale, which Izuku noticed. I see you recognize your handiwork, Izuku said as Garen shook his head. I don't know what you mean. Garen stuttered as Izuku eyed him. Alright, then let me spell it out for you. There's your friend, your best friend Kenpachi. You two were inseparable until he got married, and suddenly your romantic feelings dropped the B. But you know Kenpachi would never go for it, even if he wanted to. He's married. You came up with the idea to get rid of his wife, but of course you don't want to hurt him any more than necessary. So at first you went with the soft approach of driving a wedge between the two, monopolizing Kenpachi's time, and while he's busy, you give Kikyo threatening phone calls, telling her to leave her husband. That's a lie, I did no such thing. Izuku tossed a page across the table showing the phone records for the Senji home. There were at least 3 calls every day from a payphone suspiciously close to your apartment. Izuku countered before going on. Of course Kikyo would never worry her husband like that, so she kept the calls secret, which you knew she would, but husbands can sense this kind of thing. You wouldn't know that having not been married. Being a married man myself, I can tell when my wife is troubled, and Kenpachi knew the same, though Kikyo never admitted anything, which was all part of your plan. Izuku said, eyeing Garen like he was a fish in his shark tank. Kenpachi's worried about what his wife is hiding and confides in you. You sit there and watch the two suffer, but you started to get impatient, so you upped the ante, sending letters to Kikyo. Sure enough, there were pictures of her to let her know you were serious and always watching. No doubt you expected Kikyo to dispose of the letters, but she didn't, and it was easy enough to get your fingerprints off them, though you were very careful with the cutout letters. Izuku elaborated as Garen clenched his fists together. Still Kikyo persisted in holding on to your man, and finally you couldn't wait any longer. You made your move and killed her by pushing her down the stairs. Quite cliché in my opinion, but what do I know? I'm not a murderer, Izuku said as Garen slammed his hands on the table. Kenpachi was my best friend, I loved him, but she was in the way. I didn't want to kill her, I just wanted to scare her. I went to her house to break in and trash it, but she was there and saw me. I couldn't let her get away. I grabbed her arm, and she swung on me. I let go and she spun off balance and down the stairs. It was an accident, Garen said, holding his head low. Izuku shook his head. You're garbage. You destroyed 2 people's lives for your own selfishness. I have no pity for criminals like you, Izuku said as he stood up and walked out the door, leaving it open. Take him away, he said to the 2 officers in the hall, and as Garen came out in handcuffs he saw Kenpachi. Ken, wait, it's not what you think. I did this for us because I love you. Kenpachi spit in Garen's face and walked away as Garen yelled and screamed, having to be dragged away by the officers. Izuku sighed as he opened the door to the observation room and looked at Suzuki. I told you not to sneak in here, Izuku said as Suzuki shrugged and put away his notebook. I need the research, and watching the best detective in action is a good way to get it. My latest solved case, Suzuki said as he handed Izuku a folder. Izuku flipped through it and nodded. The flattery was a bit much, but good work all the same, he said as he walked to his desk and pulled out a drawer and placed the folder in it. He looked into the drawer and nodded as he looked at Suzuki. Case number 100. I didn't think you'd find this many cases to work in your school. I want to say I'm worried, but with your track record I doubt anything big will happen that you can't figure out, Izuku said as he leaned over and pulled out a thin folder. This is what you're here for, right? The cold case of your own, Izuku asked as Suzuki nodded. Well, a deal's a deal. You can look this case over when we get home. It's all yours, Izuku said, handing the case to Suzuki, who held it as if he'd been presented the Holy Grail. Remember, any breakthroughs you make, you bring them to me. You're not a cop, remember that, Izuku said as Suzuki nodded excitedly. Good, let's go home, Izuku said as he left his desk. Suzuki had come to his father before he started his first year in middle school, and told him he wanted to be a detective like Izuku. His father hadn't taken him serious, but humored him and told him that if Suzuki could find and solve 100 cases before this, his first year of middle school, Izuku would give him an official cold case to work. Suzuki had jumped at the deal, and Izuku began to train his son in the science of investigation. Sasuna, age 36 and number 15 Hiro Lizardi, stood in the middle of her home and bit at her lip as she looked around. The place was a complete mess. Beakers and jars everywhere, papers strewn all over the place, and furthermore, there were crime scene photos all over the walls. She respected Izuku's process. He wasn't the best detective in Nisatafu for nothing, but this was too much. He had the entire basement to himself for his investigations. Why bring it up here? And the worst thing was that Suzuki had been taking after him as well. This is why people think my husband is a serial killer, she shouted as she heard the front door open. So this girl has been missing for several years, and the only one still concerned is her sister. The husband was suspected, but there was no evidence to prove his involvement, Suzuki asked as he and his father came in. Yes, I have my suspicions, but for now I want you to go in with fresh AGGH. Izuku was stopped as a dismembered hand began choking him, and there was another knotted in Suzuki's hair. The two were supposed to clean this place up, Satsuna shouted as she dragged the two inside and slammed the door. If this place isn't spotless and crime-free by the time I'm done with dinner, you two will be the next crime of the century. Sasuna said as Izuku coughed. Here there's no such thing as the perfect crime, though you might come close. Sasuna smiled. Maybe for you, but how likely do you think your coworkers are to solve this crime without you there? She asked as Izuku swallowed. Point made, Suzuki, shall we? Izuku said as Suzuki nodded. The two began picking up papers and pulling the photos from the walls. In the city of Musatafu there exists a powerful dojo led by arguably the strongest quirkless man. This man has obtained the title of #1 martial artist, even going up against people who have quirks and coming out on top. Izuku Midoriya is the pride of Japan, and his dojo stands as one of the country's many jewels. It was the beginning of the year, and many had gathered outside the Raikuju dojo for its yearly enrollment tournament. Every year the dojo opened its doors and took on students. The record amount of students taken on in 1 year was 10. It has never been beaten. There were dozens of times that number gathered here now. Oh yeah, this is it, I'm definitely getting into the Raikuju school today, said one boy with 4 arms and green skin as a girl next to him laughed. She had purple hair and 4 eyes. Think again, my good sir, the Raikuju has no need for a brute such as you. This is a place of elegant style and technique, not a back alley fight club. The girl said as the 4-armed boy growled. Try saying that again to my fists. He shouted, raising his fists above his head, as the doors of the dojo suddenly slammed open. Everyone looked to the empty doorway, except for the 4-eyed girl and the 4-armed boy, as they looked down at the figure between them. There stood a boy with bright orange hair and a streak of green down the left side. He stood in a green guy tied by a black belt. A finger was pointed at the boy and a palm outward to the girl. I would appreciate it if you didn't disrespect this dojo by fighting in the street, the boy said, glaring at the boy before looking to the girl. Please, he said with extreme cold as the boy dropped his arms. Right, sorry, he said as the girl gave a small bow. My sincerest apologies, she said as well as the boy stood up straight with a bright smile. Thank you so much for your understanding. Now everyone, my name is Izuku Midoriya. I will be the instructor for your entrance exam. Now if you'll follow me, I will explain the parameters of your test, Izuku said as he led everyone up the steps and into the large training room of the dojo. The test will be simple, all you have to do is grab one of these from behind me, Izuku said, showing 10 white belts. If you can somehow get past me and there was blur as something raced past Izuku to the case. Sorry sucker, but I'll be taking one of those belts, shouted a girl with blonde hair and black spots in it as she blurred past Izuku. This one's mine, she shouted as she reached for a belt, only to be knocked aside and slammed against the wall. A spectral hand of glowing blue energy floated where the girl had been before disappearing. Everyone looked from where the hand had been to Izuku as he came out of a palm thrust stance. I'll admit that was a nice try, but please wait until the explanation is over. As I was saying, get past me and claim your spot in our dojo. As you know, the record of new members in 1 year was 10, so that's the amount of belts we have here, which means about 90 to 95% of you are going home. Izuku smirked at the crowd, sending a chill through them all. Of course that's the best case scenario, but make no mistake, I will do my best to make sure none of you get a belt. I won't allow any weaklings in my dojo. This dojo belongs to my father and I am its inheritor. If someone weak enters his dojo, it will mar our reputation, so I suggest you all come at me with your best or else get out. On the balcony above the training hall, Izuku Midoriya stood in the shadows watching his son. His green eyes shone as he assessed his boy. Izuku moved next to him. Are you sure about this, Izuku? Izuku is just a boy. Giving him this kind of responsibility all on his own seems a bit excessive, Izuku said as Izuku remained silent a moment before speaking. Izuku has grown so much in skill. He's my best student, always has been, but he hasn't grown in maturity. I've coddled him as my successor as such that has made him arrogant. He needs to put his pride on the line, Izuku said, crossing his arms as Izuku looked at her son and sighed. She couldn't deny her husband's assessment of their son. Izuku was a prideful young man bolstered by his incredible martial skill. I hope this won't end badly, Izuku said as Izuku smiled. If a setback here is enough to stop Izuku, then I overestimated him, Izuku said. The crowd of would-be students looked at Izuku before some began to rush forward, followed by others, until the entire horde was coming at Izuku. Izuku took a deep breath before opening his eyes as around him, a pair of giant translucent arms appeared at his sides. Izuku moved his hand forward as one of the arms slammed down onto the floor, causing a ripple in the ground, knocking people to their knees, as others leapt over the shockwave, before being swiped to the side by another giant hand. The hands mirrored Itsuki's own hand movements, being able to push back all the combatants. This battle lasted for an hour, with many applicants just giving up after being knocked back again and again. There was only one boy left in the end as he fell to his knees. What the hell, this is impossible. There's no way I can beat this guy, I'm too weak, shouted the last entrant. The boy in question had no hair and wore glasses. His t-shirt and track pants were dirtied from his repeated attempts to get past Itsuki. He was unremarkable in every sense of the word. Itsuki smiled from his spot in front of the belts. He hadn't been pushed back or needed to move from his starting point. Then go home. I told you I wouldn't allow a single one of you to pass. You're just too hard-headed. Itsuki said before a voice rang out. You have passed. Izuku said as he dropped to the ground next to his son. Izuku Midoriya, the most powerful quirkless man, stood at 5'8" with green hair down to his shoulder and stubble on his face. He wore a deep green guy open to reveal his broad chest, but instead of a black belt, he wore a sash around his waist, with the Japanese number 1 and a red circle. Father, what do you mean? He hasn't gotten past me to receive the belt. Itsuki said as Izuku grabbed one of the belts and dropped it in front of the boy. What? The boy said, looking at Izuku with confusion. You admitted your weakness in the face of insurmountable odds, but still you persevered. That is true strength. There are those who are more powerful than you. Knowing this and accepting your weakness means you can still grow in power. Those who refuse to look beyond their own strength and just barrel forward are doomed to failure. Izuku said as he turned to his son, who was not happy at all. Father, you can't be serious, he's the weakest of all the entrants. Itsuki shouted as Izuku turned to his son. And yet he's the last one standing. I think that means he's the strongest. Izuku said as Itsuki shook his head. That's not right. You told me I could perform this test the way I wanted, and now you decide to change the rules because you feel sorry for this weakling. Itsuki said. I refuse to accept that. Strength comes from taking the hard road, not by taking handouts from others. This dojo builds strong individuals and should only accept strong individuals. Isn't that why you have the entrance exam only once a year, and so few are accepted? Itsuki asked as Izuku shook his head. I see why you would think that, Itsuki. You've always been strong, so you don't know the struggles of those who are weak. I only hold the exams once a year because it's easier for me, and the reason I accept so few students is so that I can give them my full attention and nurture their minds to use the skills I've taught them for the right reasons. This boy reminds me a lot of myself when I was younger. The strong have no concept of the burden of power, but the weak do. Izuku said before turning back to the boy. Itsuki grit his teeth and clenched his fists. I will not accept this, he shouted. You never gave me any special treatment. I worked hard every day for you and for this dojo. I worked until my body gave out again and again, just so I could be worthy of your mantle, and you never held back, so why now? Izuku sighed as he looked at his new student. Why don't you come back tomorrow? We'll begin your lessons then, he said, ushering the boy out the door, who was still in a state of shock as he walked down the steps in a daze. Izuku turned to Itsuki and took a fighting stance. This has been on your mind for a while, hasn't it, Itsuki? Very well, let's talk like only we can. Izuku said as from above. Itsuka shook her head. It always comes down to this with these two. It's the only way you two can understand each other. Martial arts are bond between you, she said, leaning on the railing with a smile on her face. Itsuki circled around his father for a moment before attacking. His astral hands going forth and clapped around Izuku, who braced himself and blocked with his forearms. Itsuki kicked forward, producing a large astral foot that slammed into Izuku, who blocked with his foot, halting its progress as Itsuki dropped from above. He's completely open, all his limbs are occupied, Itsuki thought as his father suddenly vanished as all three limbs slammed together, with Itsuki landing on top of them before they disappeared. Izuku appeared a short distance away, looking at Itsuki, his face inscrutable. This only served to infuriate Itsuki more as he launched at his father his phantom hands and feet, throwing themselves at Izuku, who dodged with ease. Itsuki kept this up for minutes until he could produce no more astral attacks. Itsuki stood in front of his father exhausted, but refused to give up as he threw weak punches against his father's abs. Nothing I did was ever good enough for you. It was just expected because I was your son. You were never proud of me, Itsuki said before Izuku pulled his son against him. Itsuki, I never stopped being proud of you. You've always been a prodigy. You're nothing like I was at your age. I was weak and feeble. It wasn't until my master gave me a chance that no one else did that I became strong. That's why I built this dojo, Itsuki. To make sure that others could get the chance I did. You never had that problem. No one needed to help you get strong. You always were, but you need to temper that strength with humility and compassion, Izuku said as he hugged his son. Itsuki huffed a little as he blushed. You could say it more often, Dad, he said as Izuku chuckled. Alright, I'll admit I was wrong on that front. Itsuki, I am very proud of you. You are the future of Ryokuji Dojo, I have no doubt about that, Izuku said as Kendo landed next to the two. Alright, make some room for Mama, she said, getting in on the hug. I'm proud of you too, Itsuki, and what your father said is true. If it wasn't for me, your dad would still be a cute little wimp. I miss that guy, she said as Izuku blushed. It's your fault that wimp isn't here now. Your training nearly killed me, Itsuka, Izuku complained as the orange-haired woman waved her hand. Don't be such a baby, she teased. Wait, Mom was your master, Dad? Itsuki asked as Izuku sighed. Yes and no. I asked your mother out, and she only agreed to date me if I could pass her training regimen for a month, so kind of, but my official master was Jack-sensei, Izuku said as Kendo frowned. He may have been your official master, but I was your first, Kendo said as Izuku shook his head. Yes dear. Another day at UA, same as any other day except for one thing. Today was Parents' Day, which had completely slipped the mind of Roku Midoriya. The young man was sitting at his desk twisting the long rabbit ears that hung down the sides of his head. Roku was tall unlike the young man. His hair was lime green that traveled to the fur on his rabbit ears. His eyes were bright red and under them were a smattering of freckles. "Dude, what's wrong?" asked one of Roku's friends, Kayashi. Roku looked up at the older girl. Kayashi was his upperclassman in her second year of UA, and she was as tall as Roku himself with black hair and olive skin. "It's Parents' Day. I completely forgot," he said, groaning as Kayashi looked at him. "I don't see the problem. I mean, sure, having our parents here is pretty embarrassing, but you act like it's the end of the world," she said, sitting on his desk. Kayashi was a statuesque woman whose quirk gave her the ability to turn her skin into whatever she touched. Roku's worried because his parents are super competitive and they want Roku to be the very best, but he's too laid back for that, so he keeps his parents from coming to Parents' Day every year. Roku turned to the person who spoke out. The boy with sky blue hair and blonde streaks. He was a foot shorter than Roku and Kayashi, but his incredible physique put Roku in the shade his best friend and resident chatterbox Marion. "Marion, do you think you could have broadcast any more of my secrets while you were at it?" he asked the boy as Kayashi rubbed her chin. "You know you don't talk about your parents very much, are they? I mean, they're heroes, right?" Kayashi said as Roku looked away, refusing to answer. "Oh, come on, it won't hurt to tell us, right?" she asked as Marion, ever the helpful young man, offered the answer. "Oh, his parents are Rabbit Hero Mirko, and the green harm area was kicked in the side, sending him through a wall, due to his permeation activating to keep from causing any damage to the classroom." "Oh, really? Well, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. The rabbit eaters should have been a dead giveaway. If you kept them up, I probably would have known sooner," Kayashi said as Roku groaned. "That's why I don't want anyone to know who my parents are," he said with an eye roll. Kayashi sat in the desk in front of Roku. "Okay, spill it. Your parents are both like top heroes. What's the story?" she asked as Roku sighed, seeing as how Marion had let the rabbits out of the bag. He might as well come clean. "It's like Mario said, my parents are really competitive. They're the top tier red bell power couple, and they want me to be the best, and for a while I was. Up until high school I was the best in everything I did, but after a while I realized that shit sucked. I hated working that hard, so I just stopped. I do enough to get by, but that's it. But if my parents found out, they'd want more. The other reason is because my mom is every guy's wet dream," he said with a shudder as Kayashi nodded. "Well, can't deny that your mom is hot. I'm not into girls, but if I was, your mom would be at the top of the list," Kayashi said as Roku glowered at her. "Exactly. Do you know how many guys' houses I've been to and walk into their bedroom to find my mom plastered on their walls? It's disturbing, so I kept it secret from everyone. As far as people know, my parents work overseas, but now that's all going to come to an end. I'll have to throw my anonymity away while they're here," he said with a sigh as the bell rang, signaling the beginning of the day, as the students went to get ready for their events. Numerous people poured into UA for one of very few UA events that was open to the public. Standing near the entrance was the hero Lemillion and the heroine Nejire. Lemillion wore a gray suit with red tie with white dots, reminiscent of the suit his deceased Master Knight I wore. Nejire was in a black skirt and lavender blouse with black heels. As the two stood there, they noticed another couple walk in. This pair garnered a lot of attention. A man in a green pinstripe suit with deep green hair walked into the campus. Standing next to him was a dark-skinned tall woman with white hair and a robotic left arm. She wore jeans and a tank top with the word rabbit scrawled across her bust. "Izuku-senpai, there you are," Mirio said as he and Nejire walked towards the new hero pair. "How have you two been?" Mirio asked as Izuku smiled and bumped fists with Mirio. "Did Mirio, and you don't have to call me senpai, I'm not your upperclassman anymore," he said as Nejire came in. "Oh, come on, you'll always be our senpai, Izuku-senpai," Nejire said as Izuku sighed and held his hands up. Fine, so how have you two been?" Izuku asked as Mirio spoke. "Oh, good, everything is fine. I still have the number 1 spot," Mirio said as Rumi stepped forward. "For now maybe, but I'm coming for it, Lemillion," Rumi said as Izuku smirked. "Not if I get there first," he said as the three locked eyes. Nejire didn't really care about the number 1 hero spot, she was just happy to help people, but she knew that having these two at his back would keep Mirio focused and driven. Hey, why don't we have a little competition?" Nejire asked, gaining the attention of the three. "Let's compete at the stall games, and whoever wins is king or queen. Wait, no, never mind, how about we let our kids decide? After all, they're the future of heroics. There's supposed to be some sporting events later in the day. Whoever wins the most out of the events wins," Nejire said, seeing the spark of competition in their eyes. "Deal." All three shouted as they proceeded to the school to find their respective sires. Roku sighed as his parents found him and told him about the competition they had going and groaned. He'd have to really get serious now. There was no way Marion would turn down a challenge like this, so he was stuck doing it. "You understand, right, Roku? This is for the family," Rumi said as Roku nodded. "Alright, Mom, I get it," he said as he went to his desk and caught sight of Marion looking at him absolutely ecstatic. "Guess I've got no choice," Roku said. Roku was in the boys' locker room changing into his gym clothes next to Marion. "You could have said no. Your parents actually listened to you. Roku said as Marion laughed. Why would I say no? I've wanted this for a while. You never take my challenges seriously, but now you have to. Marion said as Roku groaned. Alright, you started this. Roku said as he and Mario went to the track. This will be first heat of the races. There will be 4 races in all with 5 competitors when I call your name line up. Their homeroom teacher said, calling both Marion and Roku to the starting line. In the stands, the 4 parents sat together. Rumi's leg was bouncing excitedly as Izuku smiled. He knew his son had this in the bag. After all, he was the son of the fastest man alive. The starting signal was shot, and in a blast of air and dust, Roku was on the other side of the finish line. At his starting position was a web of cracked earth. Seconds later, Marion crossed the finish line, having flown at his fastest, using his wave blast to give him a boost across the finish line. Roku sighed, looking at Marion. You know I can't hold back. Roku said as Marion smiled. I'd kick your ass if you did. Marion said as from the crowd shouting could be heard. That's my boy. That's my son. Shouted Mirko as Izuku clapped furiously to the point his hands were a blur. At their side, Mario and Nejire clapped as well. That's just the first event, don't get cocky you two. Mario said as Izuku and Rumi nodded. We'd never dream of it. The two said in unison. The next event was a game of dodgeball with Marion and Roku on opposite sides. I'm going to get you back for last time, Roku. Marion said as Roku shrugged. He started this. I just wanted to go about today giving minimum effort, but you just had to encourage this. He said with a sigh as 7 balls were lined up along the middle line of the court. Begin. Shouted the referee as Roku raced forward grabbing 2 balls, as another 3 were blasted with Marion's power, and grabbed by him and his teammates. Roku took no time in throwing his ammunition and pelting 2 of the opposite team, while speedily avoiding any retaliation. The game was really just Roku and Marion whittling down the other's team, until only the 2 of them were left, at which point Marion's permeation kept him from being hit. But Roku's speed wasn't much help in a small area like half a court, and several balls thrown at once were his undoing. Nejire hugged Mario from the side as the 2 cheered their son's victory. Sadly, the last events were class events, and since Marion and Roku were in the same class, they couldn't compete against one another. The day was almost over, but no winner had been crowned, so the parents, with permission from the teachers, arranged a final contest. Basketball. Roku and Marion said as the 4 adults nodded. Indeed, it was a game of rock, paper, scissors. It was either this or swimming, and we won. Izuku and Rumi said. Basketball was Rumi's sport back in high school, and Roku was just as good. Izuku preferred soccer, but having a wife who loves basketball kind of got him into it as well. Roku grit his teeth. He thought he was done with this. He wanted to just go back to being average. He didn't care about being the #1 hero. He wanted to be a hero because he knew he would be able to do his own thing then. He didn't want to be a popular hero on TV all the time. He didn't want to get sucked into that competition that his parents reveled in. No? Roku said as Izuku and Rumi turned to him. What's up, Roku? We got a game to win. Rumi said, reaching for his arm only to have it slapped away. I said no. I don't want to play this stupid game. I don't want to compete. I hate competing like this. Roku said before running off, his long legs propelling him away from everything, or so he thought. He looked over his shoulder and saw none other than his dad running after him, green lightning crackling around him as he slowly caught up with Roku. Roku, wait. He shouted as Roku turned back around and ran faster, pulling away from his father, but he knew it was a lost cause. His dad's speed was insane, and even with his rabbit genes, he didn't think he could outpace his father, which was shortly proven as Izuku caught up beside him, and then cut him off, making Roku stop. Dad, just leave me alone. I'll apologize to Mom later, but I wouldn't apologize for not going along with your game or whatever. I don't like competing like you and Mom do. You both thrive on that, but I don't. Competition doesn't hold that thrill for me. It hasn't for a long time. He said, sitting down on a bench as he panted. He felt a burst of wind and then another shortly after, as his father sat next to him and pressed a cold can of juice against his son's cheek. You could have just said so, Roku. You shouldn't have bottled this all up. It's not healthy and leads to things like what happened back there. I thought you liked competing. I mean, you have so many trophies. Izuku said as Roku groaned. I know, and I guess I kind of like competing, but with you and Mom, it's like there's nothing but the competition. You constantly move from one thing to another, seeking that next rival, that next challenge. I kind of just want to take things slow. Roku said as Izuku nodded. I guess you have a point. We have been pretty hard on you about being the best, but that's because we know you can be. Roku, you have talent that few can even dream of. I think that's why you don't like to compete. You don't have someone you can truly push yourself against, or so you think. Izuku said as Roku looked at him. You're talking about Marion, aren't you? He said as Izuku nodded. But not just him, Roku. Every year new students come into UA, and every day all of you get better and better. You need to put yourself out there more. If you think there's no one who can challenge you, you're wrong. I bet soon there will come a time when there's someone you want to chase, and that will drive you forward, but until then it's fine if you just want to coast along for now. Just remember, only dead fish go with the flow forever. Izuku stated as a crash was heard next to them, and there stood his wife. Her ears were flicking back and forth for a moment before biting her lip. I'm sorry, Roku. I shouldn't have put so much pressure on you. I just wanted you to not have any regrets. I believe life should be lived to the fullest, but that might hold a different meaning for you, she said, sitting next to Izuku and snatching his juice can and drinking from it, as the three sat there and just lived in the moment. The next day Roku came into class with his ears standing straight up and walked over to Marion's desk and leaned forward. You're not going to beat me, Marion, no matter what, Roku said as Marion's eyes grew wide and a smile came over his face. I'm not going to stop trying, Marion said happily. The girl walked down a narrow street looking left and right as she smiled into a nearby window. This girl had light blonde hair done into a pair of twin tails and vibrant green eyes. When she smiled, it revealed a row of sharp teeth that clicked together. She was wearing a blood red skirt with black shorts underneath and a tight white t-shirt. Several bracelets jangled on her wrists, and her eyes were adorned with near neon eyeshadow. Her nails were garish leopard print, catching the light as she moved through the darkened streets. As she walked, she noticed the gaze of several men, but none interested her except one. He was tall and as milquetoast as they come. Her type without a doubt, she thought to herself as she licked her lips. She walked up to the man and slid against his chest. Hey there, mister, care to have some fun? She said, wrapping her arms around his neck. Men, no then. His refusal was stopped as the girl put her finger against his lips. SHHH, come on, don't leave the girl hanging, she whispered as she pushed him backwards to a darkened alley. I am please street stop, he said before yelping as the girl reached into his pants. It's okay, I promise you like it, she said, opening her mouth only to be yanked backwards by her other hand by a firm, strong grip. I think that's enough, Hinako, a man said in a firm voice. Hinako looked up into the face of the number one hero, Deku. Their green eyes locked for a moment before Hinako frowned and looked down. Deku looked away from her to the man against the wall as he shook his head and held up his hands. Please, Deku, sir, I didn't do anything, I promise. She just cam. Deku held up his hand. I know it's okay, go about your day, citizen, and don't stop smiling, Deku said as he gave a bright smile of his own, instantly reassuring the man who gave a small smile of his own before rushing off. Wow, I think he wanted you more than he wanted me, Dad, Hinako said, wrenching her hand from her father's. Of course it was only because he let her. She knew with his strength she'd never be able to pry his grip from her. Deku said nothing before grabbing hold of Hinako and throwing her over his shoulder. The girl gave a loud yell as she was carried off. No, stop, I'm being kidnapped. The number one hero is kidnapping me, she shouted as Deku flew through the skies before landing at a nondescript home on the outskirts of town. No one would think that the number one hero would live in a place like this, but that was how things had to be when you were the father of a child whose mother was a psychotic serial killer. Izuku placed Hinako on her feet gently as he sighed. I wish you wouldn't do things like this, Hinako. You're better than all this, he said, gesturing to her ostentatious way of dressing. Hinako rolled her eyes. Like I care what you think. I'm just your dark little secret. Why not drop the pretense, Dad? The only reason I'm here with you and not in some orphanage or foster home is because you couldn't risk someone finding out that the great and honest Deku had a child with a supervillain. You're not my parent, you're my warden, Hinako said as she went into the house and tossed her shoes off and then threw her bag in the corner of the living room. Hinako, that's not true, you're my daughter, and no matter the circumstances of your birth, I love you, Izuku said as Hinako grit her teeth. Then why wouldn't you act like it? Who besides me, you, and Uncle Tashi know who my mother is? She asked as Izuku closed his mouth. Nobody, that's what I thought, not even Grandma knows who my mother is. What do you tell everyone anyway? She asked, walking towards her dad. Or am I some pathetic child you saved in one of your rescues and took in because I had nowhere else to go? Am I just your new Eri? Hinako shouted as Izuku looked at his daughter. This had been a problem for some time now since Hinako had found out about her mother. She'd been curious about it for years, and Izuku had brushed it off, saying he'd tell her when she was older or just changing the subject, but Hinako was persistent, and while he was out on a prolonged mission, Hinako had broken into his computer and found all the information he kept about Himiko Toga. Needless to say, when he came back, Hinako was furious and demanded to see her. Izuku had refused, and since that day months ago, Hinako had went off the rails. She changed everything about herself, started acting out and skipping school. It was hard being a single father, and Izuku was at his wit's end with her. You're my daughter, Hinako, you mean everything to me. I don't know how many different ways I can say that I love you before you believe me, he said before Hinako stomped her foot. I don't want you to say you love me, I want you to prove it. I want to see my mother, she shouted as her eyes changed to a blood red color, and Izuku felt a pull in his body. This was the reason that he couldn't allow Hinako to live in the city. Her tantrums weren't just loud, they could be deadly with her quirk. Izuku's arm was pulled up and twisted almost to the breaking point as he was forced to his knees, and his neck began to twist. He clenched his teeth as one for all flowed through his body, sparking green lightning, and breaking the control Hinako had over his blood, allowing him to stand again. That enough, Hinako, Izuku shouted as his daughter recoiled from her loss of control over him. She stumbled back and leaned against the wall for a moment before glaring at him and running to her room and slamming her door. Izuku groaned as he pressed his temples. His heart was pounding in his head and he could feel a headache coming on. Izuku walked to the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water as he went over the events of the past few months. "I don't know what to do," he said as he drained the glass as his phone went off. Izuku groaned, hoping it wasn't an emergency. He couldn't leave Hinako right now. Izuku looked at the caller ID and saw that it was Shoto. He answered. "Hey Shoto, how are you?" Izuku asked as Shoto's cool voice came over the receiver. "Why is there a picture of you carrying a schoolgirl off into the night?" Shoto asked as Izuku nearly swallowed his tongue. "That's not what it looks like," Izuku shouted, hoping Todoroki would get the wrong idea. "I take it you had to collect Hinako from another almost crime scene," Shoto said as Izuku sighed and nodded. "Yes, she was with some salaryman in an alley. I don't know what she was going to do. I'm just glad I got there in time," he said as Shoto stayed silent. "If you want to talk, I'm willing to listen," Shoto said as Izuku smiled and sat down on the couch. "Thanks, Shoto. Things have been rough since she found out about her mother," Izuku said. He couldn't go into full detail, but he could let some things go. "Oh, you mean Himiko Toga?" Shoto said as Izuku nodded. "Yes, wait, how do you know who her mother is?" Izuku shouted, sitting up. He knows he never mentioned Toga by name, and the most he'd ever given to describe her was that she was an inmate arrested for a string of assaults. "It's kind of obvious, Izuku. Just look at Hinako and then couple that with the vague truths you give about her. It's not hard to figure out. Still, I'm sure that the only ones who know about Toga are myself, Bakugo, Achako, and probably Tsu," Shoto said as Izuku groaned. "Well, Achako always knew. I didn't know about the others. I'm surprised Koch-chan hasn't said anything to me about it, not that we speak all that often," Izuku said as Shoto posed his assumption. "So Hinako is asking about her mother, and you don't want to tell her anything in the hopes it will protect her from that side of herself," Shoto said as Izuku nodded. "Yes, exactly, and Hinako doesn't understand that. She thinks I'm doing this for my own benefit," Izuku said as Shoto gave a soft chuckle. What's so funny?" Izuku asked. "She doesn't understand because you're wrong," Shoto said as Izuku arched a brow. "What do you mean I'm wrong?" "I'm just trying to protect her," Izuku said as Shoto shook his head. "Do you remember when we were in high school and you forced me to use my right side? I refused to do so because I rejected my old man's power, but you made me see that it wasn't his power, it was mine. You're doing the same thing to your daughter, Izuku. You're cutting her off from half of who she is. She's confused and angry. You have to tell her the truth, Izuku, or else she'll never be whole." Izuku leaned back as he sighed. Shoto was right. He knew he was the second the flame hero said it. "I don't know if I can. That wasn't the best time for me. I wish it never. Don't say that, don't even think it," Shoto said, immediately cutting Izuku off. "If you say you wish it never happened, then you're also saying you wish you never had a daughter, and that is something no parent can ever say," Shoto said as Izuku bit his lip. "Alright, I'll talk to her." "Thanks, Shoto," he said. "Thanks are unnecessary, we're friends and this is what friends do," Shoto said as Izuku laughed. "I guess you're right," he said before hanging up and rubbing his face. Tomorrow was going to be hard. Hinako rolled over in her bed and rubbed her eyes as the sun cast its thin light across her bedroom. Her sleep had been fitful at best. She still felt tired, but her caught mouth demanded immediate attention. She got out of bed dressed in a too big shirt. She recognized it as one of her dad's. She didn't know why she didn't throw it away or burn it, but for whatever reason, no matter how mad she got at him whenever she felt bad, this shirt always made her feel better. Hinako walked out of her room and headed to the kitchen, only to find her dad there sitting at the table. He looked as bad as she felt. Looks like last night's events had affected him too. She opened the fridge and poured herself a glass of juice without saying a word to her dad. "Hinako, let's talk," Izuku said from his place at the table. She scoffed. "I thought I told you last night I don't want to talk anymore," she said, only for Izuku to speak. "If you want to see your mother, then you're going to have to talk to me first. That's the only way this works," Izuku said as Hinako looked at him. Her green eyes widened some. "Okay," she said as she sat across the table from him. "Let's talk," she said as Izuku took a deep breath. "First off, I love you and I always have and always will. You are my daughter first and foremost. Everything I did was to protect you, but a friend of mine showed me how selfish my actions were, and for that I'm sorry," Izuku said as Hinako looked at her dad. Her dad may keep things from her, but he never outright lied to her, so she knew she could trust his words. "Thanks for that, Dad," she said as Izuku leaned forward. "I've made arrangements for you to see your mother today. She's being held in a maximum prison called Tartarus, but before we go see her, I would like to tell you the circumstances of your birth. Your mother and I first met when she attacked a camp I was in at the time. She became obsessed with me. I met her several other times after that before she seemingly disappeared. I was in a relationship with another girl. We were happy for a time, but it didn't work out. She left me, but then she came back. I was so happy that I didn't think anything strange was going on. How should I put this? We celebrated our reunion, or so I thought." Izuku covered his face at what he would have to say next. "We were together for 2 weeks before I realized that she wasn't who she said she was. It was Toga in disguise as her. I realized that she had been working in the shadows to break us apart and then take her place in my life. Of course I took her into custody, but by then she was already pregnant. So now I have the mother of my only child in prison for life, and a baby girl I don't know the first thing about taking care of or how to tell her who her mother is. I kept it a secret from you because I thought it better you didn't know, but also because your conception was part of one of the darkest times in my life. It's not your fault, don't ever think that, Izuku said as he looked at her. Hinako looked at Izuku as he drug his hand down his face. She could tell this took a lot to say, and now that she knew these things, she knew what she had to do. Thank you for telling me, Dad, she said as she rounded the table and hugged him. I'm sorry about what I said last night, I just didn't want you to keep this from me anymore. I know you love me, she said as the two embraced. Izuku and Hinako walked into the lobby of Tartarus, one of the world's most secure prisons on the planet. Izuku was dressed in his hero suit. A green bodysuit patterned with white across the chest and a red cape at his back. He met with Shishikura, the lead guard of Tartarus. Everything has been arranged per your request, Deku. Shishikura set his hands behind his back as his narrow eyes went from father to daughter. Right this way, he said, turning on his heel and proceeding forward. I'm not going, Deku said, his fist clenching. I can't see her, he said before looking at Hinako. I'll be waiting here for you, he said as he gave her a gentle push forward after Shishikura. Hinako nodded as she followed the guard to a small room divided by a barrier of glass. There was a chair on either side of the glass. Hinako sat in one as the door was closed behind her. The room was blank, the walls white, except for the cameras dotting the walls and ceiling. Hinako rubbed her arms as she sat there. The room seemed really, or maybe that was just her imagination. She was nervous about this. After everything her dad had told her, she'd spent most of the night looking up her mother, and she was terrified by what she saw. The door on the other side of the room opened and a woman was brought in by 3 guards in full riot gear. The woman was average height, her blonde hair was down to her shoulders, except for a pair of messy buns on either side of her head. Her golden eyes flicked around the room for a moment before settling on Hinako. Hinako saw her eyes crinkle from a smile that she couldn't see under the Hannibal mask she had on her face. She was dressed in white prison scrubs, and her hands were held together by handcuffs. The guards went about undoing her mask and placed her in the chair opposite Hinako before leaving the room in haste. Hinako distinctly heard the sound of a large lock being slammed into place. The two women stared at one another in silence for a moment before Himiko broke the silence first. You're a pretty girl, Hinako, Himiko said with a motherly smile. I see Izuku has been taking good care of you. That's good, I always knew he'd be a good dad, she said as she scooted forward, her golden eyes scouring every inch of Hinako. Izuku doesn't send me pictures of you. He's so selfish, Himiko said before waving her hands. Sorry, mommy shouldn't complain about daddy, Himiko apologized. You're Himiko Toga, right? Hinako asked as Toga cocked her head. Yes, of course, but I'd prefer if you called me mom, Himiko said with a small smile. Hinako looked at her mother. This was her mother, the woman who killed so many people, but there had to be a reason for it, right? Her mother was a high school student, for fuck's sake. There's no way a high school student just wakes up one day and decides to become a serial killer. I came here today because I wanted to know you. Dad didn't tell me anything about you until last night. He said you tricked him into loving you, Hinako said before a thud was heard and looked up to see her mother had slammed both her hands against the glass. Her face was pressed against the glass. He's lying, she hissed at Hinako. Izuku always loved me and he knows it. He and Ichako broke up because she knew that he loved me. The only reason Izuku is saying that is because he's a big shot hero now, but back then he was just Deku, and he loved me just as much as I loved him. Hinako looked at her mother as she grinned at her. This wasn't the grin of a mother, this was the face of a predator. Then why did you transform into another girl to be with him? Hinako asked. Toga laughed. You stutter just like him. It's so cute. Isn't it obvious? Izuku asked me too. We couldn't be together with me the way I am, so whenever we were out I'd transform into Ichako, Toga countered. If Dad loved you, then why did he arrest you? Hinako asked. Toga laughed as she looked at the camera. I never knew you were such a practiced liar, Izuku. I think I love you even more now. Because he didn't want me around you. When he found I was pregnant, he sent me to the hospital where Eraserhead was, and he popped my disguise and arrested me. He thought he could keep you from turning out like me, that's why, but he was wrong, wasn't he? Toga asked as she looked at her daughter. You're like me. You want to be free and do what you want, whatever you want, right? Himiko said as Hinako bit her lip. She had been feeling like she was suffocated under her father, and she wanted to act out, she wanted to be herself. You have M inside you, Hinako, you're my daughter. You're me and I'm you, Himiko said, pressing against the glass. Hinako stood up, slamming her chair to the floor. No, I'm nothing like you, she shouted as she reached her hands to the glass. Toga felt her body jolt as her limbs became stiff, and then started to bend in ways they shouldn't. So this is a quirk. I like it, you could kill so many people, she said before her neck began to turn. Hinako grit her teeth. I'm not like you, I'm not like you, I'm not like you, she chanted over and over as Toga's head began to turn further and further. The door was thrown open as Izuku grabbed hold of Hinako. Hinako, stop, stop. You're not like her, I promise you're nothing like her. Izuku shouted as he grabbed Hinako and turned her away from the glass, breaking her hold on Himiko as he cradled her in his cape. It's okay, it's okay. He whispered to her as she cried against him. I want to go home. She whispered into his chest over and over again. We'll go home, I promise I'll take you home, just wait outside for a moment. He said, unclipping his cape and wrapping Hinako in it as Shishikura led her out the door. Toga coughed as she sat up, rubbing her neck in one of her arms. She's so strong, Izuku, but what else could you expect from our daughter? She said, looking up into the green eyes of Deku the hero. She's my daughter, and no matter what happens I'll make sure she never turns out like you. He said coldly as Toga smiled. You can't stop it, Izuku. No matter where she goes or what you say, she'll always be my daughter too. Izuku reared back and punched the glass, splintering its entire surface before turning around. I won't let that happen, he said as he left, hearing Toga's laughter. It had been a week since Hinako had seen her mother, and she and her father were touching down in front of a doctor's office. Both Midoriyas took a deep breath before giving a small awkward chuckle. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, Izuku said as Hinako gripped her father's hand. I don't want to, but we both need to, she said with a smile before elbowing her father in the side. Don't tell me the almighty Deku is scared of a little therapy, she said with a smile as Izuku smirked. No, just feel kind of silly coming here. I face all kinds of threats, and never needed this before, but now. Izuku trailed on as Hinako walked forward. This is my first time too, Dad, and I'm glad we're doing this together, she said with a smile as the two walked into the office. An alarm went off for a split second as a slender hand slapped it off. From the covers of a large queen-size bed emerged a blonde girl with bright green eyes. She stretched as she opened the curtains next to her bed, looking out at a beautiful stone garden in the white sand perfectly rigged. This girl is the only child of Izuku Midoriya and Himiko Toga. 14-year-old Hinako Midoriya. Hinako slid out of bed dressed in a tank top and panties. She skipped to her bathroom, a wide grin on her face, showing off an array of pointed pearly whites. Hinako did her morning routine before getting in the shower. Today was a special day and she needed to look her best. Her father was coming home today. As she exited the bathroom in her birthday suit, she found her mother sitting on her bed. The two looked like a before and after picture, or an older and younger sister. The only differences were Hinako's green eyes, whereas her mother's eyes were golden, and Hinako's smattering of freckles, both gifts she got from her father. Today's the day, honey, Himiko said as she stood up in a red blouse and jeans with heels. In her arms was an outfit for Hinako to wear. The girl looked at the ensemble and smiled. Sure as mom, I can't wait, Hinako shouted as the two embraced. There was a gentle but firm knock at the door before a tall woman wearing a black suit with silver hair tied back into a ponytail and blood-red eyes with a sharp horn above her right eye entered. Madam, young mistress, it's almost time to depart, the woman said as Himiko smiled and nodded at Hinako before walking towards the silver-haired woman. Get dressed quickly, Hinako, your father has been waiting for long enough. Thank you for the reminder, Eri, Himiko said as she walked out. Aren't you excited, big sis? Hinako asked as Eri turned to Hinako and gave a gentle smile. Yes, young mistress, I am quite happy to see the master return. Now hurry and get dressed, your mother is right. The master has been far more than patient, Eri said as a light spark glinted off her horn before she left. Hinako smiled as she got dressed quickly. Her mother had picked out a modest red skirt and a black and white striped long-sleeve shirt. Hinako and her mother were driven to a courthouse which was surrounded by a deep crowd. People were holding up signs with pictures of her father, some of them even had her father with a giant X over his visage. Hinako growled as she clenched her fists. Easy, darling, these people don't matter, Himiko said as she placed a hand over her daughter's. If you say so, mother, Hinako said as their car was parked and the two women were escorted out of the car by Eri and a small platoon of guards. Izuku Midoriya is a butcher, shouted a man before hurling a rotten tomato. Eri reacted immediately, grabbing the fruit out of the air and hurling it back, splattering the man with it, as Hinako and Himiko gave a small giggle as they walked into the courtroom and sat down. Izuku Midoriya was led into the courtroom. He was a tall-eyed man. He was clean-shaven and his hair was combed back. Izuku wore a deep green suit as he sat down with his lawyer. The judge made his way to his bench and sat down. It was an older, jolly man who looked out onto the room before locking eyes with Izuku. The older man coughed before speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to ascertain the innocence of one Izuku Midoriya. He is charged with trafficking human organs of the deceased who were in his care. How do the people find? The judge asked as the delegate from the jury rose. Your Honor, we were unable to come to a majority vote. The courtroom erupted at this statement. The judge banged his gavel multiple times as Izuku shook hands with his lawyer. The prosecution immediately jumped up. Your Honor, we would like to retry this case with a new jury as soon as possible. After gaining control of the court, the judge looked between the two parties. Prosecution, this trial has been going on for several months. The jury has already been switched out once. I cannot subject anyone else to these proceedings. The evidence you have has been tried and explained to death. It's time to call it quits and think of something else. I hereby declare Izuku Midoriya acquitted of all charges. That is all. Izuku stood up and smiled at the prosecution, and then turned to his family hugging his daughter and wife. Fantastic work as always, Mary. Izuku said as he and his lawyers shook hands once again as they exited the courthouse. There was a media circus waiting for them outside as the conclusion of the court was made public. Izuku walked down the steps towards his car, only to be intercepted by two well-known individuals, Red Riot and Lord Explosion. You did it again, didn't you, Deku? Fucked with people's minds to get your way. You're as much a piece of shit as you've always been. Katsuki Bakugo said as Izuku shrugged. I have no idea what you mean, Koch-chan. Justice was served here. I'm innocent. Izuku said as Bakugo stepped closer to him. You fucking slime, this isn't over, not by a long shot. I'll get you if it's the last thing I do. Bakugo said before Izuku's lawyer pushed papers into Katsuki's face. I'll choose not to take that as a threat, Lord Explosion, but consider yourself served. This is a restraining order. You are not to come within 100 feet of Mr. Midoriya or his family. The harassment you and the police have committed against Mr. Midoriya ends here. Bakugo snatched the papers as Mary stepped back, but once Izuku and Katsuki locked eyes, his mind was assaulted with images. His girlfriend and fellow hero Chako Uraraka was nude, bent over a table, as Izuku fucked her from behind and smiled in Katsuki's face. The papers in Katsuki's hand exploded as he blasted Izuku in the face, making him fall to the ground. Eerie moved like lightning, going to reach for Katsuki before Izuku's voice rang out. Don't Yuri. Lord Explosion just broke the law in front of all these people and cameras. Izuku was being held up by a furious Toga as she glared at Bakugo. Hinako's eyes were blood red as she stared at the man. It'd be so easy to kill him, just burst a blood vessel in his head, and that would be that. Izuku stood up, wiping blood and soot from his face as he stroked his daughter's hair. It's fine, Hinako, let the police do their job. He shouted as he locked eyes with Commissioner Tsukauchi. The man grated his teeth as he walked up and clapped cuffs on Bakugo, who was being held by Red Riot as he ranted and raved. What the hell, man, you can't attack him like that, shouted Kirishima. I'll fucking end you, Deku, you hear me? If you come near her, he shouted before the click of handcuffs brought him back to reason. He looked at the cuffs and then at Tsukauchi. What the fuck are you doing? He growled as Tsukauchi took a deep breath. You are under arrest, Lord Explosion. As you know, attacking someone unprovoked is assault, but even worse, you used your quirk on a quirkless civilian. That upgrades it to aggravated assault. Tsukauchi said as Bakugo growled, about to release another stream of ranting, but Tsukauchi cut him off by leaning in close. Don't make this worse than it already is. I don't know what he did to make you hit him, but he's got the high ground right now. They have claims of harassment against you and now an assault. If you make a scene, that'll play right into his hands. Tsukauchi whispered as Bakugo bit his tongue. Tsukauchi turned to face Izuku and his family before bowing low. Please forgive Lord Explosion's outburst. As the police commissioner, I take full responsibility for his actions. Izuku wiped his face, noting the blood from his lip, and looked at Tsukauchi. Sorry, Commissioner, I am normally a forgiving man. I mean, I save lives for a living, but this is too much. A hero assaulted a civilian for no reason. I plan to press charges against Lord Explosion, so any other conversation you want to have with me will be with my lawyer. Now, if you don't mind, get out of my way. I'd like to go home. Izuku said, adjusting his suit as Tsukauchi took a deep breath and led Bakugo away, followed by Red Riot. Izuku and his family climbed into the car as his lawyer spoke. I'll have the papers drawn up immediately to have the full extent of the law brought down on Lord Explosion, sir. The lawyer said as he left. Izuku nodded as he shut the door and was driven off. Once inside the car and away from the courthouse, Izuku burst out laughing. That fucking idiot Katsuki, he said, snickering as he licked the blood from his lips. Izuku had seen that attack coming from a mile off after he put that image in Bakugo's head, then had dodged it, but with a quick bite to the lip he gotten the hero arrested and bought himself time to fix whatever problems his absence had caused. Toga giggled as she leaned against Izuku's side and kissed him, savoring the taste of his blood on her tongue. You're really bad, Izuku, she whispered against his chest as Izuku shrugged. The world is bad, he said simply as Hinako threw herself across her father's lap. Dad, you're home, I'm so happy. Hinako squealed as Izuku stroked her hair, causing the young girl to purr like a content kitten. That's right, sweetheart, just in time for my little girl's birthday, he said, drawing attention to Hinako's birthday. Hinako smiled at her dad as they continued to drive. So how many people did you bribe on the jury to get off? Himiko asked as Izuku leaned back. More than I should have. I learned that out of the 12 of them, 7 thought I was guilty and 2 were on the fence, the remaining 3 thought I was innocent. I offered the 2 fence-sitters a nice bribe of 10 grand each, and one of the ones who thought I was guilty, turns out his mother needed a new liver. I called up a few connections and got her that liver. So 3 people, he said with a shrug as he noticed they weren't driving to the Shai Hasekai base. Himiko, where are we going? He asked, looking at his wife who looked away and whistled suspiciously. Izuku's eyes narrowed as he leaned towards her and blew air against her neck, causing her to yell before he bit her ear, making her moan. You know I'm a doctor and nobody knows your body better than me, he whispered as he nipped one of her lips. Okay. You don't play fair, Izuku. It was a surprise. I'm taking you out to dinner at your favorite restaurant, she said with a huff as Izuku leaned back and smiled. You're so sweet, he said, kissing her cheek. Izuku and his family walked into the empty restaurant with the Eri and his bodyguards. Standing at a table was the chef owner. Mr. Midoriya, your table. Izuku smiled as he sat with Toga and Hinako on his left and right. Aizen, I told you, just call me Izuku. How's the lung? Izuku asked as Aizen took a deep breath. Working hard, sir. I've got my full course lined up for you and your family. It will be here shortly, Aizen said before leaving. As he did so, Eri stepped forward. Boss, I know it's not proper, but the men and I have prepared a gift for you as well, she said as Izuku turned to face her. Oh? He asked as Eri pulled her finger and having two of her men drag in another Hassaikai member. The man was bloody with one of his eyes swollen shut. This is the reason your handoff went bad that night, boss. He betrayed you, she said as Izuku eyed the man and took a breath. All of you, every Hassaikai member, pledged loyalty to me. They drank from my sake cup and made themselves my children, my family. So why did you betray your family? Izuku asked the man as he breathed through a broken nose. A tear slipped from his eye. I love you, boss. I would never betray you. What I did wasn't meant for you. It was meant for her, he shouted, staring at Eri. I wanted her out of the way. I knew I could take her place and do a better job. Please, Pops, understand I would never hurt you on purpose. You weren't supposed to be there that night. You never handled the exchanges. Izuku cocked his head to the side. So it's my fault that your greed and jealousy nearly got me locked up and removed from my family. What a foolish son you are. Normally I would have you killed in a brutal manner, but we're in an ally's restaurant, and I don't want to disrespect his place of business. Nor do I want you to stay in a trunk and die from the heat, so I will allow you a merciful death. Eri. Izuku said as Eri placed a hand on the man's head, and in an instant he was gone. The only thing left were his clothes. Donate his clothes and thank you all for this. This is what family does for one another, Izuku said with a grin as he turned around to continue celebrating his daughter's birthday and his freedom. During their meal, Izuku made a call. He didn't tell anyone what it was about, which wasn't strange, but he did let slip that it was about a gift for Hinako. This excited the girl to no end as they arrived back home. Izuku, Hinako and Himiko went to the secret underground labyrinth beneath their home. They arrived outside a locked door with two guards on the outside. Izuku nodded to his men as the door was unlocked and opened. Izuku looked at Himiko for a moment. The older blonde smiled and nodded. Okay, I'll let you have your little father-daughter moment. After all, I've got something special planned for you tonight, she whispered before walking away, escorted by Eri. Izuku and Hinako walked into the room, and in it hung a nude blindfolded woman with her hands chained to the ceiling, and her feet spread apart and chained to the floor. Happy birthday, Hinako, Izuku said as he walked up and tore the blindfold off and locked eyes with the Chako Uraraka. There was a flash of recognition before Chako screamed and tried to attack Izuku. Let me out of here. You can't keep me here. Katsuki is going to kill you for this, the Chako shouted before Izuku backhanded her. Silence. Katsuki isn't going to do a damn thing. He's too busy rotting in jail for the night at least, and that will give us plenty of time, Izuku said as he walked over to a table and unrolled several surgical utensils, the first of which was a scalpel. Now Hinako Uraraka here is going to be your training partner. I know since I've been away you haven't been able to train, so I'll be instructing you on where best to use your quirk. Twisting veins to break a person's bones, closing blood vessels, all that good stuff, but I think a visual aid is in order, don't you? Izuku asked as Hinako smiled wide and nodded vigorously as she stepped towards her dad. Thank you for the present, Dad, she shouted happily. Izuku smiled a sadistic grin as he turned to Chako. You're very welcome, sweetheart. Now the first thing we do is remove the skin, Izuku said as he moved towards Chako, who shuddered and flinched away from the blade. Now hold still, wouldn't want to nick something important, Izuku whispered as he pressed the blade against Chako's arm. Just think of Koch-chan, he said with a dark chuckle as he made the first incision and Chako began to scream. Katsuki walked out of the jail cell he'd been kept in overnight. Tsukauchi had been able to pull some strings to make sure he was kept isolated and only stayed overnight, but that didn't help with the charges he would be facing in the future. Kirishima was outside with his car ready to take the blonde home. The two rode in silence as they arrived at Katsuki's home. He and Red Riot walked in, and as they rounded the corner they stopped at the grisly sight in front of them. The Chako hung from a meat hook in the middle of the room. Her body was stripped of its skin, except for what was on her face. Her organs were arranged under her in a circle perfectly tended to, and stapled to her chest was a simple missive. Here's your pound of flesh. Katsuki fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face as Kirishima threw up. Deku. Today was Sunday. Like every Sunday, he was expected to be up early in the morning to get ready for church. This would not be the case for Ibusaki Midoriya. For most of his life, Ibusaki had attended church with his mother. His dad never did though. He'd asked his dad several times over the years, but his father either brushed the question aside or made up some excuse. This was something he was thankful for today as a burgeoning teenager. There were things on his mind that he knew his mother wouldn't understand, but his dad would. He had to do this today, even if it meant disappointing his mother. Ibisaki had green hair like both of his parents, his hair being thick green thorny vines, the same as his mother's quirk, but his went a step further. Ibisaki's skin had a green tinge, and from his arms sprouted small thorns. He walked out of his room to find his mother sitting in the living room with her Bible on her lap. She looked at her son finding him not dressed. "Ibisaki, what's wrong, why aren't you dressed?" she asked as she came over to feel his forehead finding he had no fever. Ibisaki clasped his mother's hand gently. "Mom, I don't want to go to church today," he said looking at his mother and found her eyes a bit dim. She took a deep breath before letting go. "I think you should reconsider, Ibisaki. This is a necessary part of our faith. Please go get dressed or we'll be late." Ibara said looking at her son as the boy felt his will crumble a little. "Come on Ibara, let him have this," Izuku said coming around the corner dressed in a muscle shirt and all-night pajamas. "You've been taking him to church since you gave birth to him. I'm sure God will forgive him if he spends one day doing his own thing," Izuku said as Ibara looked at her husband. "Izuku, this is good for him. In fact, maybe you should attend as well for once." Her dark eyes locked onto Izuku's as the two parents stared at one another before Izuku smiled. "Sure thing, I'll get dressed and go down to the church and read them a volume or two of my good book," he said as Ibara paled some and then looked between the two men and huffed. "Very well then, I'll be going," she said gathering her things and left slamming the door. Izuku flinched at the loud bang. "Well, that's going to come back and bite me. Anyway, enjoy your Sunday, Saki," Izuku said as he clapped his son on the shoulder and began to walk away only to have his son grab hold of his arm. "Dad, can I talk to you?" Ibisaki said as Izuku arched a brow and shrugged. "Sure thing, son, come into my office," Izuku said as he headed downstairs into the basement. Ibisaki looked around, having only been down here when doing the laundry. His father was a manga creator. He had made a superhero manga about a boy who didn't have a quirk, but due to the kindness of the boy's idol was given unimaginable power. It was a hit when it came out, and from his father's words, it was set to be made into an anime in the near future. "So what's up, Saki?" Izuku asked as he turned on his computer showing a sketch of a page. Izuku began to touch it up before inking it. Ibisaki swallowed as he sat down. His heart was pounding in his chest and he was sweating, but he steeled himself. Dad, I think I'm in love," Ibisaki said as Izuku's pen skirted across the screen. "Fuck." Izuku cursed, undoing the mistake before turning to face his son. Love you say?" Izuku asked as Ibisaki nodded, blushing as was his father. Izuku swallowed as he rubbed his head. "Well, congrats, I guess. Being in love is something. Despite your mother's sea lies, still love her, and despite my atheist views, your mother still loves me. I think that's why she loves me. I'm pretty sure if I ever gave up and converted, she'd divorce me," Izuku said with a chuckle as Ibisaki popped his head up. "You don't believe in God, Dad?" Ibisaki was shocked. He knew his father didn't share his mother's passion, but he never thought his dad didn't believe at all. Izuku rubbed the back of his head for a moment as he thought about how to answer that. "Yes and no, Saki. I believe that there is something bigger than us out there. That some force moves the universe. Do I believe there's a singular entity that does that, and also polices us, counting each and every bad thing we do, and we just have to pray and hope our good outweighs the bad? No." Izuku coughed at this. "Anyway, we're not here to talk about my philosophic views, we're here to talk about my boy being in love. First off, this might not be the love, Ibisaki. In fact, it won't be. You're young, you'll have lots of loves, but only one of them will be the love, understand?" Izuku asked as Ibisaki nodded his head. "I know this might not and probably isn't going to be my one and only love, but I do feel like I'm in love," Ibisaki said as Izuku smiled and gave his son a soft punch to the chest. "I'm happy for you, son. So who's the lucky girl? What does she look like? Is she older than you, taller, shorter? Do you like him thick?" Izuku asked, giving his son an elbow as Ibisaki blushed. "Dad, it's not like that," Ibisaki said, feeling his heart pounding in his chest again. "Oh come on, you stood up to your mom for this talk, so don't skimp on the details. Is she bussy or petite? Is she in your class or?" "Dad, it's a guy," Ibisaki shouted as Izuku stopped talking, his mind going blank as his eyes slowly drifted to his son. "What did you say?" Izuku asked as Ibisaki felt his eyes brim with tears. "I like a guy. I've liked him for a while. I didn't want to tell mom because, well, you know what the Bible says," Ibisaki said as he hugged himself. He heard his father move and then sat next to him and pulled Ibisaki to his side. "It's okay, Ibisaki, don't worry about what that damn book says," he said as he kissed his son's forehead. "This must have been on your shoulders for so long. I'm sorry you had to keep this to yourself for so long." Ibisaki leaned against his dad. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered as Izuku shook his head. "There's nothing to be sorry for. Never apologize for being yourself," Izuku said as he sniffed, trying to keep it together. "First of all, you are you, and that's who you have to be, Ibisaki. If you say you don't like girls, then I believe and support you, but I'm also not going to sugarcoat things either. You might have it rough sometimes. Some people aren't as progressive as you, but I can promise you one thing. The first is that I and your mother accept you as you are. Your mother is religious to a fault, but when it comes to you, nothing else matters," Izuku said as he leaned back. Out of all the things his son was going to say to him, he did not think of this. Honestly, he would have been less surprised if Ibusaki said he was on drugs, but this was something else. Sure, in his time as a manga artist he'd worked on a few BL issues here and there, but that was fiction. This right here was as real as things could get. So what's he like? Izuku asked, not knowing where else to go with this. Ibusaki laughed at his dad's clear discomfort, but appreciated the effort. He could only imagine what his mother might have to say about this. He's kind of like you, to be honest. He's a serious fanboy and runs the Lemillion fan club at school. He's a total fan over that guy. I'm kind of jealous. Ibusaki said, blushing as he thought of his crush. Izuku was also blushing at his son's words. I'm happy for you, son, and there's nothing wrong with liking superheroes. I mean, it was my reason for being when I was your age, and now it supports us, and your mother is a hero, so there's that. Izuku said, looking at his son before an idea came to his mind. Wait, right here, I think I might have the perfect icebreaker for you. Izuku said as he went to a filing cabinet, pulling a key from around his neck and using it to unlock the cabinet. Ibusaki knew his dad kept special issues from heroes he liked in there. He'd never given it much thought other than that those issues held significant value to him. Izuku rifled through a series of comics before pulling out one in particular. Finally found it. I really should order these guys again, but that's something for another day. Ibusaki, I present to you Lemillion issue 1 signed by the hero himself. Izuku said, handing the plastic-sleeved comic to his son. Ibusaki was by no means a comic geek, but even he knew the significance of what he was holding. Dad, I can't take this. It's priceless. Ibusaki said, knowing he was holding one of the most expensive comics in Japan, right behind a signed copy of All Might which he knew his father also owned. In contrast to his son, Izuku waved his hand. Don't worry about it, Ibusaki, me and Lemillion go way back. In fact, I have comics from most of the pro heroes. Izuku said, rubbing his nose as Ibusaki shook his head. His father was such a proud nerd. If you say so, Dad. Ibusaki said before hugging his father fiercely. He was so glad he did this. Careful, son, that comic is in mint condition, and the love of my boy's life deserves the best. Izuku said as he looked down at his son and ruffled his hair before dropping the other shoe. You know we have to tell your mother though, right? Ibusaki sighed and nodded. I know, Dad, I just don't know how she's going to take it. He said, and Izuku nodded. Ibara's religion was the core of her being, but he knew and hoped his wife was more accepting than the good book. Time would tell, he assumed, but for right now he and his son would just enjoy this moment with nothing else to interrupt it. Ibara came home an hour later and looked around, seeing neither her husband nor her son here. They're probably out goofing off, she said before hearing them talking in the basement. Ibara sat her things down and headed down the stairs, and there she found her son and husband reading comic books. So is this what was so important you decided to skip out on service? Ibara asked as Izuku looked up from an All Might comic as he lay on the ground with his head propped up on a pillow, while Ibusaki lay with a Lemillion comic and his head propped up on Izuku's stomach. If she wasn't so annoyed about what they did this morning, she'd have stopped to take a picture of this cute scene. Izuku looked to his son, who swallowed before sitting up. Mom, I have something to tell you, Ibusaki said as he looked to his mother and then his father, who sat up and nodded his head. Ibara looked at the two men for a moment and then sighed. Well, what did Ibusaki? What do you need to tell me? She said, walking further into the room and taking a seat in Izuku's work chair. Ibusaki took a deep breath and spoke. Mom, I'm gay, Ibusaki said, listening to the deafening silence of the room as several looks flitted across Ibara's face, before it finally settled into a neutral look. Ibusaki, I can't say I approve of your choice in partners, but you are my son and I love you. Nothing will stop me from loving you, I promise you that, and I'll pray for you, Ibara said before standing up and coming over to hug her son. I love you, Saki, she whispered as she kissed his forehead. Izuku smiled and joined in on this hug as well. See what I told you, son? We're both here for you, Izuku whispered. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-ifs coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination. Goodbye everyone.